Hello and welcome to CherrySTEM number 9, Toxic Masculinity and Male Cooperation versus Competition. Now we have a little bit of an introduction for you guys to go over the concept of masculinity and precisely toxic masculinity. And let's see if we can figure out what that means, or at least what people out there are saying about it. So let's get right into it.
Do it.
In gender studies, hegemonic masculinity is a concept popularized by sociologist R.W. Connell and promotes the dominant social position of men and the subordinate social position of women. Conceptually, hegemonic masculinity proposes to explain how and why men maintain dominant social roles over women and other gender identities, which are perceived as feminine in a given society. As a sociological concept, the hegemonic nature of hegemonic masculinity derives from the theory of cultural hegemony by Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci, and it analyzes the power relations among the social classes of a society. The conceptual beginnings of hegemonic masculinity represented the culturally idealized form of manhood that was socially and hierarchically exclusive and concerned with breadwinning, that was anxiety-provoking and differentiated, that was brutal and violent, pseudo-natural and tough, psychologically contradictory, and thus crisis-prone. Many sociologists criticized the definition of hegemonic masculinity as a fixed character type, which is analytically limited because it excludes the complexity of different and competing forms of masculinity. Consequently, hegemonic masculinity was reformulated to include gender hierarchy, the geography of masculine configurations, the processes of social embodiment, and the psychosocial dynamics of the varieties of masculinity. However, proponents argue that hegemonic masculinity is conceptually useful for understanding gender relations and is applicable to lifespan development, education, criminology, representation of masculinity in mass communication media, and health of men and women. So while sociologists criticize hegemonic masculinity as a valid viewpoint or approach towards understanding humans, the proponents, and I'm assuming gender studies and feminist academics, still hold on to the idea that hegemonic masculinity is useful, particularly when looking at characters in communication media and considering male-female relations. Academically, hegemonic masculinity clearly fell out of favor, yet there has been a new wave of gender studies and feminist academics that have created or transformed this concept into a new one. Rather, they kept it pretty much the same, they just gave it a different name in order to pass by the censors. According to Geek Feminism Wikipedia, toxic masculinity is one of the ways in which patriarchy is harmful to men. It refers to the socially constructed attitudes that describe the masculine gender role as violent, unemotional, sexually aggressive, and so forth. A well-known masculinity men's rights movement that is not most anti-feminist has yet to appear. For a silencing tactic used to discredit patriarchy's harm to people who are not men, see Patriarchy Hurts Men Too. So already, in the very description of toxic masculinity, we see a defensive stance and a very desperate desire to make this concept valid. In fact, we will come back to this definition and the concept that patriarchy hurts men too. The first thing I would like to parse apart is seemingly contradicting ideas or these two thoughts that seem to go in a bit of a circle. It's kind of a catch-22, if you will. On one hand, feminist academics are saying that we are teaching our boys and men ways to be toxic as pretty much the only way of representing their gender. On the other hand, we have some other, or maybe even the same feminist academics saying that masculinity itself has toxic nature to it and it must be reined in. So which one is it? Is it that we are teaching men a violent and poorly socialized way of being, and that is their masculinity? Or is there something innately wrong and toxic about men in general? I would really like to find a feminist academic who can clear this up for me for their entire movement. once and for all. That would be really, really great to get a definitive answer if it is masculinity itself that is toxic, or ways in which we are encouraging men to behave. Now, this Psychology Today article for Father's Day and beyond, it explores the dangers of toxic masculinity, and it features this man being down on himself for being a bad father. He believes that he has failed as a father because he has not taught his sons a proper way of being men. Orlando shooting is a strong theme throughout the article. And he mentions that, yes, my fellow fathers, through our endorsement of toxic masculinity, were largely responsible for the troublingly high rates of violence against women. Now, many of the shooters in the recent years who have become quite popular in the media, so to speak, they did not singularly attack women. There has not been a single attack that claimed more female lives than male lives. It is really curious that the Psychology Today article would not only vaguely mention this amorphous endorsement of toxic masculinity that fathers are doing, but also that a lot of these gun violence crimes, including Orlando shooting, was perpetuated against women. That is a really painful fallacy to get past, and it just really makes me sad about Psychology Today and their lack of mentioning that this is an opinion piece or it's an op-ed, anything like that. It is particularly disappointing because it is in Psychology Today, a field that I felt quite a strong kinship with, to the point of spending half of my degree on psychology education. Now, in the past 5 to 10 years, particularly past 5 years, we have had a variety of players who have wanted to talk about toxic masculinity and warn of the dangers of it. I mean, everyone from Bustle to Esquire to the Yale Herald to even Brown University, the Drudge Retort, and of course the Huffington Post and the Mary Sue have covered ideas of toxic masculinity and toxic masculinity in the movies. Now, the two examples given, Wolverine and The Bachelorette, are shown as examples of toxic masculinity, which is very curious since the Wolverine origin story, a lot of the anger and violence that spurred on Wolverine had to do with a betrayal of a woman. So that would be very curious that that in particular is the one example of all the movies and all the superheroes would be the one where a woman wronged a man and he kind of lost faith in humanity a little bit, and that's the one they pick for toxic masculinity. It is quite a brilliant Freudian slip, in fact, because from what I have gathered and what I understand based on my neuropsychology background, men who experience high levels of misogyny and really, truly toxic masculinity, there is a reason why they do not trust women. And often it is because they've been hurt by women really, really badly. And I don't think hurting men even further and punishing them for being hurt is a way to fix the situation, particularly when the punishers are all women and feminists to boot. Seems like you are just throwing fire on a burning dumpster fire. Fire. So much fire. Speaking of hot garbage, we mentioned this Bachelorette, Huffington Post article. And while they're not taking a beef with the entire show of Bachelorette, but one specific guy, it is curious that a search of their entire website did not show us toxic femininity as an example in media, or even an article mentioning those two words put together. while we very clearly have a female counterpart to The Bachelorette called The Bachelor. Or does Huffington Post believe that all women selected for reality television are perfect angels? Now, other than talking about entertainment media and other maybe personal beefs that some of these ideologues have with men or male characters or manhood in general, we have another side to the toxic masculinity conversation, which is less of a conversation and more of just constant transmit mode without any ability to, look at feedback. So we have another wave of ideas about toxic masculinity, and here we have a direct connection between toxic masculinity and mass shootings. Now already we have a fallacy of assuming things that are assumed, implied, and left unsaid in this title of an article, is that women don't do violence, is that women don't shoot guns, that women don't kill in other ways. And normally, I wouldn't care. None of us would care about equal representations between genders of a particular topic that's of a negative nature. However, when you have nothing but non-stop attack of masculinity from the feminist side of the debate, and not even a single attempt, not even a little bit, at equality of coverage, which is equality is a big sticking point to feminists, apparently, as we have seen many of them say, then we start raising the question. If you believe in equality and you talk about crimes and shootings and bad human behavior and you only talk about men, that's not equality. Article after article, starting with particularly Elliot Rodger situation, that has given rise to this idea of masculinity, poisonous, toxic masculinity, as well as connection to shootings. So we have this super giant highway between murder and masculinity that's getting paved and paved and paved by articles from Atlantic, The Salon, The Atlantic, The Salon, and even Yahoo News try to get in on the happening topic. Toxic masculinity, that's where the party's at. And of course, Rall story, brilliant feat of something, has connected rape with murder. Not just connected, but said that rape and murder is the same thing, as if they are even remotely the same thing. Now, toxic masculinity hasn't limited itself to shootings and violence that was perpetuated by men, which, of course, a little side note here, the most recent shooting in San Bernardino, I believe, included a man and a woman. It's interesting how you never see articles about toxic masculinity, including that couple, or at least that man, because there's the uncomfortable elephant in the room of a woman being involved. Of course, we have to jump through more hoops as feminist ideologues in order to fit that into our hegemonic masculinity theory. That was debunked, remember? That's why none of this makes sense. It wasn't right to begin with, but feminists just carried on with it. So not only do we have this association between shooting and killing and masculinity, but of course we've moved on in popular conception to things like Trump and the election and other ways in which masculinity is bad. And here we come upon a particularly curious nugget of mind gymnastics that gender studies and feminists seem to do, which is how do you reconcile toxic masculinity with patriarchy? Patriarchy theory states that men benefit and women don't. And then we see men who don't benefit. So what do we do about that? Well, instead of looking at the issues again and considering that maybe men and women both have it hard and easy in different ways depending on their class and other statuses, no, we really want this hegemonic masculinity idea to work. And so there's a new idea, as a gig feminist wiki was saying, as a silencing tactic used to discredit patriarchy's harm to people who are not men. See, patriarchy hurts men too. That sentence doesn't actually really make sense. It seems what they were trying to say is that for a silencing tactic used to discredit patriarchy's harm to people who are men, see, patriarchy hurts men too. Now, this is particularly curious because if toxic masculinity hurts men too, then why do we need the word masculinity and the concept at all? Why can't it just be toxic?
Hello? The video stopped, I think. Guys?
Yeah, apparently her microphone is dead. Trying to figure out what's going on there.
Oh, okay, okay. That's all right.
How about
I guess
Nope, you're not coming through.
Are we back now?
I can hear you, but I can't hear the video.
All right, let's get.
Well, here, we can go through my microphone, because your microphone's not broadcasting. So let's just go through mine.
Do it.
All. Why can't it just be toxic humanity? Badness, evilness, terribleness, shit humans, primate instincts, violence in general. Why? Why, oh why, do we need to make sure that manliness and maleness is in any way associated with something that hurts all people equally? And it's not a silence attack.
They're screwed up again.
What?
It is logical observation of the world and reality around us. If patriarchy is real, then why do men outnumber women 5-1 when it comes to homelessness, and 4-1 when it comes to suicides, and 20-1 when it comes to really fucking dangerous jobs? But everyone from Motto to MTV News to, of course, Everyday Feminism, the New York Magazine, Salon, and the Federalist are talking about toxic masculinity hurting men too. The interesting thing is, toxic masculinity debate, which it's once again not a debate, it's just pretty much a transmission of a one-sided signal from the feminists against anything male. Which, by the way, once again, I would really appreciate a classification or a clarification from feminism as a movement, as a philosophy, as a political entity, whether or not there's something that is innately toxic about masculinity itself, or if we are teaching masculine children how to be toxic. Now, the interesting thing is that the feminist ideologues, academics, people in general from the feminist and gender studies perspective, have now started doing an interesting thing of almost turning on their own. In this Federalist article, Understanding Toxic Masculinity, Why Defending Men Isn't Enough, and that is kind of an odd title in itself, the subline says, conservatives and liberals may have cleared a space in which toxic masculinity can run amok. Very interesting approach to this issue, and in fact it goes further than that. The Daily Beast has an article published by Nico Lang that talks about gender fluidity that has a toxic masculinity problem. Now, what is that all about? Beast of an article. We have ideas like masculinity isn't just fragile, it's deadly. It's a very curious combination of words. One might say almost contradictory. Interesting. It's both fragile and deadly. I guess just like women are powerful and also oppressed at the same time. Fragile, yet deadly. Now, the only time that actually is true is in cases of the oleander flower, or maybe some nightshade. But from everything we've seen about toxic masculinity, the last thing it is fragile. It's so pervasive and strong and really lead-like that we need fathers to talk to their kids about it. We need mothers to talk to their kids about it. We need the entire society of feminists and gender identitists to tell men that, just to break down this horrible, terrible masculinity thing. At the end of the article, we have an example of what he calls toxic masculinity coming around. And an example is given of the Axe commercial, the Axe body spray. That is Find Your Magic. And of course, Axe has been demonized back even when I was in high school, so almost 15 years ago, for being, smelly and frat boyish and just the worst, because their commercials featured women being attracted to men because of their smell, which is a fact of reality that happens. In fact, they have done studies of having women smell their partners or potential partners sweat and rate them based on attractiveness. And what they found is that we have, as humans, a subconscious, so to speak, ability to detect immune components in a partner which are most different from our own. And if you know anything about immunology or babies, the immune system that a child inherits is from their parents. So the more varied the two parents' MHCs are, which is a series of genes that code for cell surface proteins, which control the adaptive immune response, also known as major histocompatibility complex, they found that women prefer men with the most diverse MHC from their own, which would enable the babies that they would produce to have the most varied and complete repertoire of immune responses. The thing from Axe that this writer is quoting is a minute-long segment that prominently features a man voguing in 4-inch stilettos. And the announcer says, "Who needs fire when you rock those heels?" I suppose this is a way of encouraging toxic masculinity to die down and to be replaced with femininity, I guess? I know that Axe commercials obviously don't speak for the entire feminist movement, but more and more I see that it is masculinity itself that is a problem, and they want to replace it with something like, femininity, instead of scaling down what they would consider toxic within the masculine attributes. I digress. The problem with Axe they have is that it's a bro-centric brand that once literally told men that women are nothing but castrators, and now they can get on board with gender fluidity, so perhaps there's hope for masculinity after all. By masculinity, I'm assuming they mean femininity, since that is what masculinity is being replaced with. Just a sentence after the previous sentence. This person does not seem to grasp that replacing fire with heels is not rescuing masculinity at all. It is replacing it with femininity. Now, for those who are curious, what is this literally told men that women are castrators ad? Well, it's about a 2-minute ad in Brazil, so I don't know enough Portuguese in order to understand it. In fact, I know no Portuguese at all beyond what some of the Ender's Game book series taught me, mainly the word pequeno. But here we have this lame ad, what they're calling, just terrible, because it's telling men that having a girlfriend is just boring and lame and not worth your time when there's so many strippers out there that you could be fucking right now. Just leave your girlfriend at the table at the restaurant while you go have sex with a prostitute in the men's room. So I'm really confused here between strippers and prostitutes. I have not worked as either, although I have known strippers, I have known prostitutes, I still know prostitutes and strippers, and yes, sometimes what happens in the champagne room stays in the champagne room. But not every stripper is a prostitute, Gawker.com. And by the way, Gawker.com, would you like to know that those strippers and prostitutes are women too? Did you know? Did you know that this guy's girlfriend, as well as the prostitute and the stripper that he may pay later, are all women who deserve love and a job? Did you know that? Making it about betrayal or someone being unfaithful when clearly they don't have an open relationship. Instead, you make it about how evil prostitutes and strippers are. Or no, I'm sorry, you don't even make that argument. You just treat them like things that this evil man is gonna go do in the men's room. That makes you cool, Gawker.com. It makes you real cool. Oh, and about that castration bit, well, we have the transcript from an Argentinian correspondent. And there's an editor's note that shows where they're talking about castrating. Oh, it's actually a figure of speech. That means that you, wife or girlfriend, has your balls in her purse. Oh, guess what, Gawker.com? We have that saying here too. It doesn't literally mean castration, but I guess it doesn't literally mean that only applies when feminists say something, doesn't it, Gawker?
And discuss.
Well, yeah, that was a mouthful. There's a joke there, but I'm not going to tell it. So I was thinking about a few of the ways in which the topic of toxic masculinity is brought up, and I know that we've done shows about this before. So one of the things I'm kind of curious about examining is one, I want to look at the narrative that is typically spun, because it's good to understand the arguments that are put forward by your opponents, ideologically, philosophically, politically, whatever. That way it's easier for you to sort of see where they're coming from, and maybe they'll have something that's useful, that's like a nugget, or maybe they could make a really good argument and you could say, oh, you know what, that's correct. However, in this case, I'm not convinced, and one of the reasons is because when I look at the history of feminism, everything it can only exist in opposition to men. And from the beginning, it's been that way. In the days of the suffragette movement, it was because they would use the narrative of men are taking away our ability to vote, or men are the reason that we can't do this thing, such as voting, or they beat us, so we have to take away their alcohol, which basically spurned the prohibition, or at least there was one of the narratives that was used. When we got into the second wave, they talked about how men were not necessary. Well, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle was a commonly espoused term. The problem was men, not that something. It was a difference between saying, I want something that puts me on par with you, and I want to take something from you because I feel as though you have something that I deserve, or that I should have. So we need to tear you down to lift ourselves up. And when I see this topic of toxic masculinity, in my opinion, no, I don't even think this is my opinion. I think this is the truth, to be honest. But it seems to me that the reason why the reason why feminists talk about toxic masculinity is not because they actually give a shit about men or masculinity. It's because they are afraid of men. It's because they're afraid that men can hurt them, and will if given the chance. When they see the stuff going on with these mass shootings, they see what Elliot Rodger did, even though he killed more men than women, but they'll never say that. If you look at reports, it'll just say such and such number of human beings were killed, some of whom were women or whatever, because men don't count in that math. And what they'll do is they'll say the problem is not, it's not the fact that this child was raised without a present parent, or the fact that this child was, abused when he was younger, or the fact that, he has mental issues. The problem must be that he is a man. because we've already decided we don't like men. We have something, there's something about masculinity that we're afraid of, that we despise. So therefore, when a man does something bad, it has to be because he's a man first. So this concept comes out of that. And they don't realize that a lot of what's occurred is some of the stuff that, you know, our society has done largely because we were trying to help women. For example, the majority of the thing that most of these mass shooters have in common is that they had troubled childhoods, or they did not have present fathers. They didn't have that in their life at all. And typically, like Elliot Rodger, was abused emotionally and mentally by his stepmother terribly. And his dad, while, you know, he was in his life, he was always busy making films, so he wasn't around. Elliot Rodger had nobody to identify with. He had nobody to help him, and clearly he had problems that nobody was willing to address. So one of the things that I'm hoping to sort of talk about is the idea that masculinity is not inherently toxic. It is a healthy thing that has allowed us to be the civilization we are now and have built everything that we have, is thanks to healthy masculinity, which most men are in their own way. It's also about individualism, which is interesting because that is one of the things that helps men feel, you know, like they have a place in this world, is that ability to self-assert and be the masters of their own destiny. And yet we call that toxic. The other thing I want to look at, and maybe you guys that know more about this stuff than I do can help me, is I want to look at the medication that we put boys on when they're in school, because they misbehave, because they, you know, they're not paying attention in class, or they exhibit what they consider traits that are, or symptoms of things like ADHD and autism and Asperger's and so on. And so what we do is we put them on medication because we don't understand what boys need in education. And yet they also come later on and they complain that one of the reasons why one of the ways rather in which we create this toxic masculinity is through education. But they never put the blame where it belongs. It's always on other men. Men are the problem. Men are the reason why they say society, but they never blame women. They say the men do it. And this is something that has to be unpacked. So anyway, I'm going to stop for now because my camera froze, and I want to figure out what's wrong with it. But I don't know if you guys you want to give me any thoughts on that while I figure out my situation here.
Yeah, it looks like we're still having problems with Cherry's mic, so I'm going to have to just leave mine on so she can talk through mine.
Okay.
I'm going to have to do that because I have a set of illegal, quote-unquote, headphones from Asia, and they're not playing well with my computer. Sorry about that, guys. But I really liked what Brian was bringing up because it kind of goes along with the very last thing, goes along with something I wanted to mention about the other thing you mentioned, Brian. The idea that we are putting blame on men for, you know, like you said, in education, and we're saying that boys are becoming toxic through it, you know, they're taught to be toxic and it's other men's fault. So we have that on one hand. And then on the other hand, we have, well, the fathers, you know, Elliot Rodger, for instance, his father wasn't there, and he had an abusive relationship with a woman and things like that. So in both cases, what seems very obvious to me, and I would like to say something perhaps controversial, but going back to that Psychology Today article that I mentioned in my intro, we have the role of fathers as someone who needs to, clearly we're being told fathers need to take care of this. This is father's domain. Fathers are the ones who are supposed to help their boys be non-toxic and things like that. But the way things are currently, the way that the gender roles are currently structured, it'd be hard to find a family in which the man is actually in any way the dominant mind between the mother and the father. It is almost impossible, at least in my experience in America, and largely in Russia and other places I've lived. It is difficult to find, though particularly in America,
that the woman doesn't even give her husband the lip service of, oh, you're the head of the family, honey, of course. She doesn't even try to do that. It's all out war, and I am the mother. I am obviously the one who decides what is done with the money. I'm the one who kids need to ask for everything. I'm basically the decision maker, the dominant mind in the family. And the other side of this bent coin is that, to borrow from our story, we have in schools, who is the number one between the genders represented in teaching jobs?
Exactly. It's women.
Teach a lot more than men do.
Oh, absolutely. Especially at the lower levels when the kids are in their formative ages. And the reason for that is because we stigmatize the idea that men would want to teach kindergartners or first through, let's say, fourth or fifth graders, because the education system and people in general think that they're pervs if they want to do that. So we basically, because we trust women more, we put them in those roles. And, of course, more women do tend to go into education. But yeah, I mean, this is where it comes from. Like, men can't even be role models because we think that there's something gross about it. Do you remember have you ever seen, it was recent, there was a photograph of a father and his daughter in I think they were in the shower together, and you didn't see their heads, or at least you didn't see his. And it was asking whether or not this was an appropriate photo. And most people thought it was inappropriate, even though that was his daughter, and they were taking a bath together. But if it was a woman and her son, we would find that was totally fine.
Yeah, there's a little more than that to that specific story, where that might have been the original that spurred on the one of a Western European comedians who posted a photo of him and his 2-year-old daughter in the bath because he was giving her a bath, and they were both naked and doing human things that you do with your children by washing them. And he posted it on Instagram specifically in protest or in solidarity with fathers everywhere who, have children and behave appropriately with them. And yet society has a really hard time with that concept, while we absolutely don't, as you said, put the same standards on women. And what I found really important is what people who do believe in the importance of the father's role, what they say is, how dare you leave something so important as hygiene and bonding and physical touch to just mothers? I mean, what if it's a single father? What is he supposed to do? Not know how to wipe his daughter's, bottom?
Yeah.
Part of all of this is it's this narrative of female powerlessness. They can't possibly do any harm. And if there's anything that I would label as toxic femininity, it would be this deception where they're constantly harping on that women are completely powerless, they're completely incapable of doing harm, and they're only acted upon, and it's just such a invasive, destructive ideology, and it does hold women down. It does impact them in a negative fashion, but it's just this twisted manipulation, and not letting go of that twisted manipulation is something that is really screwing up our society. Because when you can see that women are culpable in society, when women are actually powerful in society, then they also gain the responsibility for the way that things have been going. And that's what they're trying to get away from. Is they want to get away from the responsibility, but gain all of the authority. So it's the shirking of responsibility and trying to gain authority. And you'll find this in any kind of toxic relationship between an authority and their underlings. Is they'll try to set up a situation in which those under them have no authority but have all the responsibility. And when it's trying to disconnect authority and responsibility that twists and destroys all the systems of cooperation.
Well, that really brings it back to my point about schools and homes. Is that in homes we have the mothers as the dominant mind. In schools we have female teachers. So once again, female dominant mind. And we basically are letting boys fall through the cracks by not having male role models at home and in school. And not just male role models, but there's something that the fathers provide that mothers do not, because men and women are fundamentally
approach life and reality and emotions and things like that in slightly different ways. And what men provide is a framework, a stability type of understanding of consequences and chain of events and things like that, as well as being able to rely on yourself to do things and to self-soothe and a variety of things that are actually really important in order to maintain emotional calm. Men and male minds are integral to maintaining emotional and mental calm. However, we have disabled males and male minds and fathers from having any influence on their children. And then on top of that, we're also putting more and more and more pressure on men by absolving responsibility while keeping all the authority. And how do we keep the authority as women? By guilt tripping. So men. So we're doing nothing but emotionally assaulting the other half of our species, and we're pushing them down as a society in a very emotional sort of pressure way. And then we have no outlets for them. We have no ability for them to maintain their own calm or self-soothe because there are no fathers' minds present in their lives. And therefore we get this kind of a toxic situation. And yet feminists never notice the fact that it's women in the home, women in the school. Where is their culpability?
It's always this process of oversimplifying things. It's trying to make things into, you got the victim and the villain. You've got these two binaries, and that's what they're trying to do, is take all that is bad about anything that is masculine and amplify that and get rid of any kind of benefits about that which is masculine, and do the opposite to femininity, instead of realizing that there are aspects of masculinity that are positive, and there are aspects that are negative. There are aspects of femininity that are positive. There are aspects of femininity that are negative, and that we act as complementary duels. And it's funny that I was going to try to lead some of this towards game theory and looking at how there's this complementarity of cooperation and competition that is just kind of a part of so many different complex systems. And when you start getting into game theory, you see how this oversimplifying doesn't show the way that complex systems work, because complex systems work in a way where you see that there are always these gains and losses from any kind of action, that there's no such thing as this pure action, or this it's not there's no such thing as this purely good action or purely evil action. It's and if, people often can see this idea of like, oh well, you try to help a butterfly out of its cocoon and you destroy its ability to to fly. And so that kind of idea, it can be found all throughout every complex system. But yeah, I think there were other people who wanted to talk, or.
Oh yeah, no, I don't want to. I think that you are making a lot of really great points, and I wanted to add to it, to go back to the education thing, and the reason why I brought up that dad and his daughter, and how there were people who found it uncomfortable, was if enough people, let's put it that way, because I don't have a problem with it, but if enough people found a photo of a man with his little girl taking a bath together, troubling, worrying, otherwise, filled them with a sense of anxiety, like they were worried that he was a perv or something, and this is a biological father to his daughter, then how could we even conceive of a man teaching children that he's not related to at all? And this is why the education system is screwed. Let's also look at one other thing. The majority of people, in a documentary I watched today to prepare for the show, there was talk about how the number of mass shootings that have occurred, which are mostly male, that are the perpetrators. Also, most of the time they're the victims, but who cares about that? The majority of these things that happen are perpetuated by men. And the documentary was trying to make the argument that this is a function or result of toxic masculinity. The idea that a man has to assert his masculinity at all times, that it's always under threat, that he has to defend it with violence, that he has to man up, and all of these things are perpetuated by other men in his circle. They say, they'll either say other men or they'll say society, and it only potentially is a real threat to women because they don't talk about how dangerous it is for men. They just say, at some point, toxic masculinity spills over and it hurts women, and that's why we're scared. Not because it actually affects men. But if we were to take what they're saying to heart, and let's say, okay, let's say you're right. Let's say that the mass shootings that is like at an all-time high, even though it is likely that our society is more peaceful, steadily the crimes have like been declining, even like gun crimes and all this other stuff. But let's pretend that you're telling the truth. The majority of the people who are raising these boys to grow up to be killers are women. They are, from the moment they're, most of the time, I think I want to say it's like 60 to 80% of homes have single mothers, and those kids, a lot of the times, they don't even know who their father is. So that's one, especially in like urban homes, like I live in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, for example, is dominated by single mothers. Then, as soon as those kids are old enough, they go into preschool, dominated by women, or some daycare, dominated by women, or then they go into education, it's dominated by women. The only place they're getting any of their values as men is through their peers. Now, while they're in all of these systems, all of these things do not actually consider what boys need. They don't think that boys, they raise boys the way they raise girls. They educate them the same way. They're not allowed to read books about adventure or action. They have to, they're basically, they don't have, in many places, not all, but many places don't even have recess so that these guys can let off steam and run around and burn off their energy. So when you compile all of that shit, and then you also put boys in a position where they're learning their values from their media or from their peers, who also don't know what they're doing, by the way, then if they become toxic and they go and do something, why are we not blaming the people who are directly responsible if we're going to follow that line of reasoning? Which I think that to say that toxic masculinity is a real problem, I disagree with, because I think that most of it is healthy. But what people do is they focus in on the problematic individuals and they say this is proof of some larger problem, which I completely disagree with. Oh, and on top of that, they medicate boys when those boys don't behave the way they want them to, because again, they're not allowing them to be boys. They're trying to turn them into something else. And when those boys do things like hug a teacher or eat a Pop-Tart in the shape of a gun or play with like play make-believe like they're in The Hobbit or something, they get expelled, they get sent home, teachers call their parents, they worry. It's almost like the female sort of nature of being risk-averse, about worrying about problems before they become problems, is just sort of like it's on overdrive. It's like running on 11. And every boy is a potential criminal, murderer, psychopath, and they're just watching them because they're terrified that those boys are going to grow up and become destructive. But in all of the micromanagement that comes with trying to control them, they could actually be contributing to that problem because there are no men in their lives.
Well, yeah, I actually feel like part of the school issue is, once again, a little controversial to some people maybe, but I think we need to, I don't believe in segregation, of course, but I do believe we need differing courses for young boys versus young girls. I think that there are natural abilities that boys have and girls have that are different, and they're somewhat lacking in some other ways, or they have different ways of learning and different ways of expressing. And
this isn't just opinion. There's
Yeah.
hard science behind this. I actually brought up a couple of. I mean, as we brought up in other shows, we've got sexual dimorphism, but the sexual dimorphism actually goes to where we've identified areas of the brain that have to do with cooperation, and areas of the brain that have to do with our ideas of morality and our ideas of empathy, and and it ends up you find that men and women are very different in these specific areas. In other words, like for instance, you were
talking. I'm sorry, real quick. You were talking about cooperation and competitive nature and how they kind of there's an overlap, because if you're a boy and you're on a sports team, you might want to win, or you might want to do better than others, but you also like to see the others grow as well, because, like, you know, if they do, then it actually creates new sort of barriers for you to break down. Like there's a healthy competition essentially where two people are trying to outdo each other, but they're also improving each other at the same time.
Absolutely.
As an
And I find it really funny that the whole idea of patriarchy is men cooperating, and the idea of toxic masculinity is men competing. And somehow feminists, instead of realizing that the way they have things set up is one negates the other, and they kind of go in a circle. They're like, no, all the men are constantly cooperating to create this bad situation called the patriarchy. Oh, but except they're constantly competing with each other. That's how we toxic masculinity. Except they're constantly cooperating. Except they're constantly competing. Well, okay, yes, but no. And you know, a lot of Shiva's law is that a lot of things that feminists or women, specifically women, say about men is projection. It is true about themselves. I have seen this for the past 15, 10 years. It's just been, as soon as I became aware of the law, I started paying attention and noticing. And the whole thing about men aren't in touch with their emotions, and men just want to, get a trophy and move on, things like that. It has been painfully true about women a lot more than men, at least in my experience. And here we have another thing where women say, oh, men are just toxic with each other and they're competing and hurting each other. Yeah, that's a lot more what women do with each other. Women are uneasy allies more than they are brothers.
And now let me actually put some science to that. There's in Stanford Medicine, there's this article I could read a little bit from here, but basically it says cooperation between family members, friends, coworkers, and even governments around the world is viewed as a cornerstone of human society. But not everyone cooperates equally, as anyone who's worked in a group project knows, and one factor in shaping a person's approach to cooperation is sex. Previous behavioral studies have found that women cooperate more when they're being watched by other women, that men tend to cooperate better in large groups, and that while a pair of men might cooperate better than a pair of women, in a mixed-sex pair, the woman tends to be more cooperative. Theories of circa about why that is, but brain science behind them has been scarce. But basically, in this particular study, they pointed out that men were actually cooperating better whenever whenever you had male-male pairs versus female-female pairs. Men did a better job at cooperating. And so what you actually find is that there are and then getting further into the science, you find that different areas of the brain light up to do this type of cooperation, and so there's when it comes down to it, you have completely different modes of cooperation, different ways of using the brain, and so there are these differences between men and women, and attempting to make men. And so here's the thing, we've talked about that sexuality, a lot of that has to do with the brain, and so that's a very liberal viewpoint, that sexuality and that a person can be literally a man or a woman trapped in the other sex's body. But then along with that comes the truth that we don't want to shove these important complementary strategies and try to make them into one thing, and we need the complexity of these two different strategies, and instead of trying to venerate one and revile the other, we need to venerate both of them and realize they both have their strengths and they both have their weaknesses, and it's only through the complementarity of the two that we come to these better and what's the word, synergistic outcomes. And if I can go on a little bit about game theory. Hold on a second.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I was going to do a little more comprehensive write-up on game theory, but let me just read a little bit of this generality, because it is something that I'd like to do once again, perhaps a little bit better in a different episode. But yes.
Well, the way we have set up CherrySTEM format is that we will be going into deeper scientific detail, perhaps on and a cherry on top, my channel, while giving the men's rights once a month concentrated bit on the Honey Badger channel. So we could actually go into more details if you guys are interested on a different channel.
Yeah. So this kind of comes to I think that it's that game theory is something that literally everyone should try to become more familiar with, because there is it's well, let me just kind of read this little write-up I did. It may be a little off, but let me just go with it. So why do we relate men to competition and women to cooperation? Is one better than the other? How does this relate to economics and the liberal or conservative mindset? When we view this question to the science of game theory, a very interesting picture emerges from this lens. So let me state broadly how these things align, and then maybe I can get into a little bit of the specifics. But game theory is a study of competition and cooperation. It started focused only upon competition, with oversimplifications and kind of almost magical thinking of like the godlike market hand, and some of the misunderstandings of Darwinian phrase survival of the fittest, where there was this idea that competition by itself,
Pure.
one single thing, purity, it is this pure thing, and it's great. And of course that is an oversimplification, which is where almost every single problem comes from, is oversimplifying things that are extremely complex systems. So in the past few decades, however, the understanding of game theory is extended just hugely, and it's gone into an understanding of every persistent, long-standing system. Something that works over a longer period of time. So from the functioning of bacterial colonies to the systematic approach of search algorithms, the discovery of certain basic underlying principles provide a very strong analogy. They provide strong analogies between seemingly very disparate systems, such as search algorithms and the process of genetic diversification. So understanding game theory has led to an extremely non-spiritual take on the Eastern idea of yin and yang, specifically that both cooperation and competition is seen as a singular process in which each aspect leads to and relies upon and complements the other. So Nobel Prize winning economic theories are not developed without roots in game theory, and are almost wholly made up in the field. It's a hard science, and just the past couple of decades, along with chaos theory, has allowed us to peer into and understand some of the most complex and unpredictable systems of the natural world. There are the sciences that show how even the most random and irrational, magical seeming complexities of nature have underlying rational and mechanical systems. So in light of these newer sciences, those who attempt to cast either competition alone or cooperation alone as some singular standalone ideal, or binary, the venerable and vile, they show us a fundamental ignorance of the scientific principles that make up the bedrock of modern technological development and systems design. So these two interlocked and cycling principles make up for the basis of long-term systems, and severe imbalances in them leads to events such as extinction events in nature or market crashes in economics. In the modern world, we attempt to cast males as competitive and females as cooperative, but in this gross oversimplification and misrepresentation, an understanding of the underlying effects of game theory leads to the obvious realization that even this false categorization does not create a hero and villain situation, because the two are very important, different aspects of one single thing. So corporations are able to, for instance, corporations are able to exploit smaller entities because of their cooperation, and it's the lack of competition, that this creates, that allows inferior products to be sold and employees to be exploited, whereas competition would cure these ills. So, but on the other hand, of course, it's only through cooperation of groups with positive purpose that these devouring, destructive super entities that can even be overcome. It's only through cooperation that large accomplishments of civilization occur. So an understanding of game theory eventually leads to understanding that concepts of separate cooperation and competition are an illusion, or at very least, it's just different aspects of every singular action. So helping us, helping a civilization, both saves them and disables them. A short-term good is a long-term ill, and vice versa. Game theory is a mathematical study of the balance of these dualistic systems and their cycles, as well as the unbalancing and tipping points at which end these cycles in destruction of the self-sustaining systems that they make up. So while it's once again a gross oversimplification to say that men are competitive and women are cooperative, there is indeed a difference in the behavior and even a difference in morality that can be tracked to sexual dimorphism in brain structure and organization.
Yep. Yeah, hasn't there been some particularly aggressive, radical feminist ideologues who were making YouTube videos, etc., mentioning that men have an area of the white men or whatever have an area of the brain that deals with empathy is missing. So how about we debunk that a little bit there?
Yeah, okay, that was bullshit. Yeah, as it turns out, there's a couple of studies I can leave somewhere, but specifically the right temporal parietal junction is one of the directly identified moral centers of the brain. It just so turns out that men have larger gray matter and density in that particular area that has to do with morality. Then there was another area where another study showed that the frontalmedial cortices are
So
larger
wait a
in
minute.
men.
Are you trying to say that men are more moral than women based on brain science?
Well, it's the thing is it's not directly. They tried to use that as a way to say that men were less moral, and then when you go and look into the brain science, it's actually, oh no, we have more matter in those particular areas that deal with specifically morality. So
that means that the men may have greater potential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are.
Right,
Well,
because then you can track it a little further into, that the empathy in the brain, women actually do have large areas of the brain when it comes to the different aspects of empathy, which deal with, shared pain and things which we also associate with morality. So it was just debunking something that was, kind of bullshit.
Mainly why I bring that up is, and I know this is kind of a case study, anecdotal type of thing, but I do happen to see this a lot in Facebook type posts of parents. And I'm referencing a photo of a younger girl and her 2 years older brother, and they're playing like water fights or whatever. And the mother captions it by saying, "He's a better shot, but she's meaner." And that to me kind of encapsulates a lot of the relationships between little girls and little boys. And so that just kind of really brought up this idea that boys have before it is corrupted by, life pressures and other things. But when we're talking about the male type and the female type, it feels like there is more sort of a bushido that men have in terms of honor and certain rules that you just do not break, while women seem to have a more flexible view of things that they are and aren't allowed to do, and they tend to sometimes get pretty mean and do things that men would consider not okay to do. But
yeah, completely immoral.
And
the thing is, you need both the rule breaking. You have to be able to adjust to circumstances. You need to be able to look at things, look at a person's situation when you're trying to, not just a cold hard justice, but then there are times that you have to be able to cut off the empathy and see what is best for the group. And what you see in the brain is exactly these two different strategies in dealing with morality. That women tend more towards empathy. If we're gonna just go by just brain size. And actually, there is some activation patterns as well. There's differences in activation patterns. Then, you have one group saying, okay, well, let's look at people's circumstances, and then the other group saying, well, yeah, but let's stick to the rules. And both of these have ways in which they go wrong, which is what we have, once again, is this complementarity. You have to have both of these systems. Each one of them is the answer to the flaws in the other, because each one of them has flaws. Each one of them has shortcomings. And so they're to fill in the gap where the other fails. You need one or the other. And you would actually find that there are the way in which male and female, strategies align. You'll find that this difference in strategies actually happens in the different halves of the brain as well. Slightly, they're actually, whereas there's not that left brained right brained oversimplification, there is kind of the difference in the two hemispheres and kind of their overall dominant way of doing things. And it, once again, it deals with this complementarity, and it I'll even say that some of the things that we're doing, that we're kind of discovering in computing, is this complementarity between two seemingly opposing strategies is a way of doing things that creates a synergy that can't be approached with with just kind of a singular strategy. So let me continue a little further on the write up here. I'm almost done with it. All right, so to attempt to completely eliminate these sex differences and venerate one set of qualities over another is an attempt to tip a balance. So hold on a second. Yeah, it's an attempt to tip a balance, and in tipping that balance in other systems can lead directly to the failure of the systems. In scientific terms, we might think of this as sort of a drawing to the middle, like heat death or entropy. Additionally, over-amplification of these two aspects can lead a once unified dual into bifurcation. Like separating fuel from an engine, each becomes just either a chaotic explosion or a dead hunk of metal without the right interwoven relationship. So these dualistic systems exist in cycles within bounds, kind of like an orbit. When the forces are too strong, they pull apart; too weak, they crash together. Some of the first major demonstrations of these balances and their cyclical nature, and also as well as that, the level-dependent seeming paradoxes found in natural systems was with bacterial colonies. The concept of group competition was resurrected by game theory, and it was found that competitive, individuals rise to the top, but when groups compete, the groups which cooperate inside will outcompete those who intercompete. So what you have is that these level-dependent oppositional strategies exist with a single entity, and then that leads to this cycling homeostasis system. Douglas Hofstadter is he wrote Gödel, Escher, and Bach, in which he gets into kind of these.
I Am a Strange Loop.
And I Am a Strange Loop. And he would call this a tangled hierarchy or a strange loop. And all living things depend on homeostasis systems, which are cycles created by these oppositional forces. These apparent oppositions, however, intrinsically are the organism, because when they are removed, the system collapses. In this way, one can see the unity of these dualistic systems and the illusion of their separation. So I was going to talk a little bit about the history of game theory and how it went from being kind of this single-shot thing to evolutionary game theory, where over many.
Also known as Nash equilibrium.
Yeah, well, it's a little more complex than that, and I'd like to save that for a more a more detailed write-up. But basically, when it comes down to it, there are one of the things that when they oversimplified with game theory was that they had these things called zero-sum games, which basically the total amount that one gains, the other loses, and so it's a zero sum. But the thing is, things that appear to be zero-sum games turn out to not be, because when you look at groups, basically the defection in an apparent zero immediate, there's an immediate zero-sum game, but that eliminates the possible synergy component. Basically, it also destroys a synergy component. So basically, there is a loss to the overall system when it comes to defection. So there's the studies of these things become extremely interesting, and defection
is another word for intercompetition.
Right, it's intercompetition is you either defect or cooperate. There are these decisions, and like one of the examples of how the older versions of game theory and our older economic and unfortunately, what you find in universities is, once again, there's kind of this good old boys group that they don't keep up with newer technology, newer proofs, newer information, and so they kind of go by these old ideas that are just crap. And
basically, economics 101 is just regurgitating Milton Friedman's bullshit from 50 years ago.
Yeah, and it also relies upon just really ancient versions of game theory that we've gone way past. But basically, so the idea is that, they kind of at first had this idea that, well, it's always best to just defect, and just compete
out for number
competition. I'd be out for number one. That's just complete crap. And one of the early things that they kind of pointed out was was just this situation in which, okay, so if you were to have a group of people who are all reliant upon a single well, and the amount of water in that well is enough to allow everyone to simply produce enough to feed themselves with their garden. However, when you're in a society in which your attempt is to outcompete all of the rest, then you have people selling their vegetables, etc. So the question is then, following the typical strategy that was provided by these early ideas and ideals of game theory, what you should do is project that everyone will follow the rational choice. And it's actually called irrational agents or rational agents, and the rational, which is just a label that was used, and it really kind of screws things up. But the rational choice is for you, even though everyone will die if they all water their gardens, you should expect that everyone will water their garden, and therefore to maintain your competitive your competitive state, to remain competitive, you should also therefore water your garden, since everyone else will defect and not do the cooperative thing, and that is how a rational agent will all of them will end up killing themselves. And this is kind of how they discovered that cooperation is part of competition, is that there is this duality between the two, because these problems they end up causing failure of the system overall, and it's such that species who follow just this competition only model would self-destruct. You can't, you just can't do it that way. But then, of course, there are problems with cooperation only, in which you end up creating these systems that are extremely wasteful, that are extremely they become
unfit to survive.
Right, they become incapable of survival because of their a variety of issues spring up from over cooperation.
Weakness ability to survive. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna provide better science for that and stuff in a different show. But it's just fascinating to see how that you go too much in one direction or the other, and it destroys the system. And so you can see how this works. Even it's funny is it's like, for instance, in the difference between a species that is in a rainforest versus a species that is in a desert. You end up having those that are in rainforests actually take advantage of more of the available resources. Because there are more available resources, they're allowed more wasteful behaviors, such as huge plumage and lots of dancing strategies and things that where they basically the species, they develop all these sexual characteristics, such as like I said, the dancing and all these wastes of time. Whereas in the areas in which there are very few resources, they become extremely competitive, where even the babies that are born while they're still like in the nest, they'll kill and eat each other in desert type of situations. And it's just interesting to see how when there's an availability of resources, there is abundance of cooperation, and therefore there is diversification. Whereas when there is a lack of them, then you have to find that which works the very best, and so you have this overage of competition. And so, but they always exist in a continuum, and it's always trying to find the best for the situation. It's about a strategy of making a system that works. It's not it's not something that's good or evil. It's a strategy, and so it's interesting to see how this relates to the way in which human beings interact, and how we've got these oversimplified ideas that men are just they're just competing, and that's just bad. It's like, that's wrong on every possible level. Competing itself is not bad, and men aren't just competitive. It's whenever you start to look into the science and you start to try to actually understand the way the world works, you end up finding that all of these ideas that we develop as a society are just bullshit. They're based on people's feelings, and they're not based in any kind of real hard study of the way that things work. And the truth of the matter is, we need these different complementary strategies, and we need to stop trying to make men into women, and we need to also recognize the power of women. One of the things that I try to point out frequently is like, okay, so who's in control in a taxi cab? The person driving the car or the person in the back seat? Over and over and over, people do not recognize subtle power. Just because your hands aren't on the wheel doesn't mean you're not in fucking control. And the truth of the matter is that very frequently women are completely in control without their hands on the wheel, because they have a subtle power. And if we will
Centrism.
if we actually recognize their power, then they also have responsibility for things that are going on. And that is the biggest problem that's going on with feminism, is an attempt to vilify men and to shirk the responsibility and the power that actually belongs to him. And instead, I want to make sure that people understand that women are powerful, and that's what they should be also, going for, is actually recognizing their own power, their different abilities, and how they are in a way they complement and actually overcome male abilities. There is this thing that you find in these competition and cooperation models, that each overcomes the other. They each are capable of, because they take a different route, they are a way that is better than the other in a certain fashion. Just like, whenever you're doing a search algorithm, you either go depth or breadth. But yes,
that is one of the things I've mentioned about feminism, and that's exactly as you're saying. The way I see it, feminist movement is designed to keep all the power while shirking all of the responsibility. Specifically, it is, tell us that we're powerful, but don't hold us accountable, but also give us all the power. And this really goes into a really interesting thing that I urge everyone to check out, and it's something I mentioned on my Twitter. It was Krista Milburn first who mentioned this, the female pedophile, and there's a link to relating to women, which Jasmine, if you watch some of the Honey Badger shows, we had Jasmine on, and she wrote this, and I commented on it with one of the quotes from the woman who was speaking about female pedophile. And she says, we as women are quite willing to accept that we're the superior breed and do everything right. We're quite unwilling to accept that we can do quite so much horror. So it's this idea that women, and it's exactly right, this is the contradiction or the hypocrisy that is in a lot of the feminist ideologies, that women are encouraged to believe they are superior, yes, superior, not just equal, but superior, and that they do everything right. Woman's always right, rule number one, right? Mother's always right. Yet they are unwilling to accept, with all this power and all this ability, that they're capable of evil or horror.
And the funny thing is, I think that there, maybe there's some truth. I don't know. Maybe there's some truth to the idea that there was a period of time in which both groups only recognize their own superior. Maybe there was a time in which men needed to be able to recognize those traits which are masculine that can lead to bad things when they're out of control and things like that. But you know what? We've got it. We got the fucking point. And the thing is, women don't. Women don't have any view of femininity that is negative. And there's no acceptance of their shadow. Whereas men have, as a group, we have accepted that we have a shadow. We have accepted that there is something negative to masculinity, whereas there's no acceptance of the negative to femininity. There is this lack of accepting the shadow. And I think that by itself is there's this large overarching movement that feminism is standing in the way in an understanding that is empowering, something that says, yes, I am powerful, and that has negative connotations as well as positive ones. And that is what feminism is standing in the way of. And it's something that will help us integrate both men and women and continue to work together instead of spiraling apart as they're attempting to do. They're making men and women spiral apart with this narrative of the victim and the villain. And instead, we need to be coming closer together and recognizing our different abilities and our different deficits. And both groups need to recognize that there are deficits, that there is a shadow.
I believe, Ryan.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you were gonna no? Oh, okay.
No, we were just saying. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking about all the stuff that you were saying, and part of it got me thinking that it seems to me that women tend to be more risk averse. This is just the way they are. It's in their nature, and as a result of that, they also tend to be more pragmatic. Men tend to take more risks, and they do have this sort of I think that this is healthy masculinity too. Like the risk-taking helps us know what our limits are at, but at the same time, when women say, well, that might be too dangerous, or they try to protect people, and it usually comes from a place of pragmatism, that is also healthy. And those things operating in tandem is how we've been able to get as far as we have as a species. One of the things that you were talking about was brain matter stuff. And in this documentary that I watched, one of the experts said, masculinity, this is the exact words, masculinity is not organic. It is reactive. So it exists and it reacts to the environment. And the brain is plastic. The brain process involves a series of what they consider proliferation and pruning, where the male brain essentially takes things out. It like picks things and takes things out and tosses them aside. And this is all comes from socialization towards what they are calling toxic masculinity. And that's coming from the place that there are other boys or fathers or male figures that are telling them this is what it means to be a man, you have to do these things. And of course, in their narrative, it all comes down to aggression, dominance, extremely risky behavior, treating women like objects, violence, etc. So I would ask this. I'm sure that this is cherry-picked for their own narrative, but what do you have to say about this idea that the brain is plastic, that masculinity is not organic, it is reactive, and this whole proliferation and pruning process?
Well, okay.
Brian, I didn't pick that. I didn't pick it at all.
Didn't pick it.
Well, you said cherry-picked.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah, there's a baby in bathwater there. The fact is, yes, of course it's plastic, but there is variation within boundaries, and that in general, yes, men can vary a long distance into a man's mind can become more feminine, it can become more masculine, a woman's mind can be more feminine and more masculine, but there is a truth to the fact that there is like these two areas that are kind of very loose areas that overlap a whole lot, and you can gravitate in one direction or another. And yes, of course, here's the thing. What we also know about the brain is that the pruning itself is something that is absolutely crucial to human intellect. Not only just the pruning of synapses, but and that's part of the ways in which human brain goes wrong. I believe actually in autism there's a problem with pruning specifically, but pruning is an absolute necessity, just like it is in nature. You have this growth and pruning cycle that is the complementarity that you have in game theory. That's basically what game theory is about, is this growth and pruning model and how the two of them act together. That just like you would prune a rose bush or something like that, you create something more powerful. Now you go in there and just chop away at a rose bush without leaving some of the most beautiful things. Of course you destroy it. Or if you just let it grow, it just runs amok and it doesn't put enough energy into a few areras. So throughout the brain you have that growth and pruning model where we and in information itself, that's one of the things that's talked about constantly, is that if you have a photographic memory, you end up basically cluttering your mind with too many different sets of information that can end up causing problems with being able to access the information. If you were to develop a data system, it's extremely important that you're not dealing with a bunch of junk data if you want to, the best, most efficient system which can interact with the data that will most be relevant and useful. That's what concision is all about. So yes, there is a pruning, a taking away that you find all throughout nature as well. That's what predation is. It is pruning, but it is a healthy pruning where it takes away that which is weak. It doesn't take away those things that are useful, and that's the difference between creative destruction and just chaotic destruction. If you go in and blow up a building that is standing in the way of progress, is dangerous to people, then you have done a good thing by destroying it. However, if you blow up a building with people in it that's still useful, that a lot of energy was put into, then you have done something that is chaotic and non-harmonious and doesn't work towards the next thing. And the thing is, these two, the growth and pruning, are supposed to feed into each other. But when they become separated, as we're doing in society with men and women, then they kind of go out of control because they've lost the connection that makes them have this synergy of working together, where one flows into the other, and so instead they end up just completely defeating each other. So yeah, I mean, when they're saying that that the brain is plastic. Yeah, that's true. It does change some, but there are general set points, and each individual kind of has their own set point, and a lot of that has to do with the testosterone levels when they were born. That changes the brain morphology, and so there is a general set point and a size to the brain. So they're completely full of shit when they're implying that there's no difference in the brain. That is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, it's just anti-science, because it's hard fact. At this point, any kind of just the barest intimation that men and women are not different is just it's complete anti-science. It's entirely against any kind of scientific viewpoint at all whatsoever, because the way that they activate the brain sizes, and by the way, they actually control for overall brain size as well. So it's not because men's brains are in general larger. They take that into account, and once they control for the overall larger size of the human brain, there are still very noticeable differences between the sizes of certain brain areas. And so once again, it's about complementarity. It is not a one thing is better than the other. And what was the other thing that you said that this person was saying, that there's the plasticity, and then there was also the
hold on a second here. And I want to get into testosterone a little bit later, because I think that's another big thing that's always under attack. But I gotta go back and find the thing. So masculinity is not organic; it is reactive. The brain is plastic. Brain process involves proliferation and pruning. Yeah, masculinity is reactive. Well, that sent my heckles up. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? But I'm presenting that to you so you can.
Yeah, that's just opinion bullshit. Has absolutely no basis in science. I mean, other than the baby in the bathwater, which is that all that femininity, masculinity, brains are, of course, they are reactive. Of course, they change over time. Of course, they can shift a little bit in one direction or shift a little bit in another. That's
Wait, didn't they also say that masculinity is manufactured?
Yeah, I think they said something like that, which
the
is
only way in which
crap.
that could ever make sense, even a little bit, is that all babies are born, or sorry, not born, all babies are conceived as, and they have female characteristics until certain Wolffian hormones, etc., kick in, and then what is universally female genitals become male genitals in the children that will be boys.
Right, the broveries drop.
Far afield from what they were saying, but I just felt obligated to throw.
Oh yeah. It's you mean that the before sexual differentiation and testosterone thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. But it's just that's not what they mean, and that's the thing. Sometimes they'll try to play this what they're saying versus what they're meaning, and have the two disjointed and try to.
I'm not touching you.
Yeah, I'm not touching you. Oh, bullshit.
So bothering.
All right. Something else I wanted to ask you about or throw in. Oh yeah. I want to. Okay, so looking at toxic masculinity, and the way in which it is dealt with, and it's usually when the people in education, the people in medicine, the people in psychiatric / mental health, science sort of disciplines, they try to get ahead of the ball, right? So there's a boy, and he's like 6, and he is a handful in class. So they medicate him. So what I want to ask you guys about is what for the people who don't know, what are these medications doing to boys' brains? How are they affecting? Do you guys know about that much? What about things like Ritalin, things that are used on boys that are being diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or whatever it is that they're on? Because that the overwhelmingly majority of children that are on these medications are boys, and there are actually very few girls on it by comparison.
Well, the thing I find most interesting, before we get into some of the finer workings of Ritalin and other AD&D medication, ADHD, what I find to be more of a prevalent theory of ADD is kind of a lack of challenge idea, and I really feel like it goes back to my earlier point that some people might find controversial because it smacks of segregation, but no, I'm talking about having different ways of teaching elementary school topics, etc., to boys versus girls, because a lot of times we start putting boys on medication very early, way like in elementary school and sometimes in kindergarten.
Yep.
And that is because we have meshed together groups of people, men and women, boys and girls, that are different in their learning style. They have a preferred learning style that's different between the genders a little more. And boys do have a need to be active. It's like having a house cat and a greyhound in the same household and treating them and giving them the same exercise routine. The cat is not going to have the same needs for exercise as a greyhound who needs to run all day, every day. They will have different needs when it comes to what their makeup is. So I think the really important part of that, medicating young boys, has to do with the fact that we are forcing boys to play by girls' rules when it comes to development, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's the old outdated idea that there's no difference between men and women when the science is clearly in. There's just absolutely zero question. There's zero fuzziness about sexual dimorphism in the human brain. I mean, there's just vast volumes of information available about it, and it's this treating us as if we're the same that's the problem. Now, I personally haven't seen precisely the way that specifically Ritalin works, but I can tell you one thing that is interesting, that most people, if you haven't looked into the way that they develop neuropsychiatric drugs, any of these drugs, the way the development, you typically think that there's people out there that just the way that you would design a house, or you take all these different components and you assemble them and you try to kind of create something, and even if you're creating something new, you're taking components and putting them together in a way that makes sense to you to create something. That is not the way that they make psychiatric drugs. The way that they make them is by taking shit and throwing it at a wall and seeing what sticks. It is this they just keep throwing drugs at lab animals until they get an effect that kind of looks like something that they could sell, and then based upon that they market it for that purpose. The way that these drugs are made is not the way that a rational person typically attempts to make something valuable. It's a process of trial and error, and so therefore they're taking this extremely complex and fragile machine and just slamming it with a sledgehammer, and it's just that they always find after the fact that there's these massive unintended consequences, because in the brain you have these neurochemical cascades that are all interdependent, and these homeostasis systems within the different within these systems, or systems within systems that are it's like a fractal, and they just kind of whenever they kind of see something that's a little bit like what they want, they just start selling it. And so then we find out after the fact that there's all these huge changes that happen to the brain that are unintended consequences. So once again, yeah, the brain is plastic and changes. That's why you can take somebody and administer heroin to them, and I don't give a shit who they are. They are a heroin addict. It's a physical truth. It is not it's not something that has to do with willpower or anything like that. Their body physically needs it because there's been changes to their brain. Who they are has been changed. So it's these silly magical ideas about that we have about ourselves, just they don't work. When you actually get into the nuts and bolts of how we work, you see that these things, there's a sense to them. It's not it's not a bunch of fuzzy woo. But so given that, you would think that they'd be developing these drugs in a sensible manner, but that's just not. If you want to quickly arrive to market the fastest with drugs, then just scattershot, crapping things out. And unfortunately, some of the things that have started to happen in biology is you have these towers of information that are not interconnected, and the funny thing is, this is the difference between that breadth search and that depth search. What you end up having in biology is, because you've got people who specialize a tremendous amount. They specialize so much, and they know so much about these tiny little areas, because there's just so much to know, that they end up not really communicating with people who understand this other little system that's in not just in biology, but in the brain, in these neurochemical cascades, the specificity is so great that a person can just know this one little tiny area that's right adjacent to another and not know that other adjacent system, because these systems are so huge and so complex. And so what you end up having is these towers of knowledge that are not interconnected in a way that gives an understanding that allows them to plan. And so they don't have this a kind of that, how do you describe it, but a kind of a synergy that where you see the inner workings. They don't have a big picture view of things, and the way in which the academia has kind of arranged itself, and the way that the systems have just kind of played out in the way that in which we do research has made it where there is not. They're starting to get interdisciplinary. They're starting, and that's been a push, but you still end up with these disconnected towers of information that would gain tremendous amounts from just sharing information better. But there's so much pressure to create the next product that is sellable. There's so much pressure to publish or die. You have to put out some sort of crap, and you have to put it out quick, and you have to put it out. There's not time to go in and really research. Do a lot of meta research, and so there's kind of sort of a missing thing there. So the way we make these drugs, we end up cleaning up afterwards is what we do. We put it on the market, and then we just clean up the problem afterwards, because that's just it's a lot more lucrative to do it that way. You make more money when you shit things out. Right, instantly. It's always about choosing the instantaneous gratification.
Because the long-term negative effects you're going to have to compensate for with more money later.
And more drugs.
And they just don't think that it will actually cost them money in the long term.
It's true. When you pick what will get you the most money right now, then that's what's going to get you the most money right now.
Yeah. On top of that, though, we also live in a society where we're more interested in cure rather than prevention. So the stuff that when people get on meds, they wait until someone is in need of meds before they try to do something about it, and that's starting the story in the middle, right? Because you could have prevented the need for this far earlier on with things like, for example, and I'm gonna say this could be controversial, but this is my feeling is if you're a woman that's ready to have children with someone, then you should be ready to choose somebody that's going to stick around, that's going to be a good father, and that's actually you're going to be willing to work with to raise your child in the healthiest environment possible if you are at the point where you're ready to start a family, and that you're going to be able to take time away to raise that child on your in its very earliest years, from newborn on up until they're to the point where they're getting ready to go to school. Because that's actually going to give them the best possible odds to be a fully well-rounded human being that's not going to need medication. And you're going to fight with your schools if they have a problem with that. If they say, well, you know what, I think your kid is a little bit high energy, or he doesn't seem to be very focused, or he looks like he's always bored, so I think we should put him on meds. And you say, no, fuck no, because that's not a solution. That's a Band-Aid that you're trying to apply. Maybe you have a financial interest in doing it, or maybe the company that made it does too. But the point is that we have a problem with trying to find fixes for things that we could have stopped.
Well, yeah, that brings up a really good point. From what I wanted to say, it's actually two things you mentioned go to the same point. On one hand, yes, you do have to. Basically, it's the idea that. And it's something people say about America as opposed to other places in the world that, or at least older generations, were taught how to fix things. They didn't have planned obsolescence and affluenza of, something doesn't work, throw it away. And this has translated into relationships as well. So yes, on one hand, and health. So we are treating symptoms instead of underlying causes, and there's zero effort in the medicine field, well, most of the medicine field, there's zero effort to go for the root cause instead of just skating by treating the symptoms, which then cause more symptoms, then you provide pills for those symptoms, which create more symptoms of something else, and you provide pills for those, etc. And it's a vicious cycle that leads old people to take, up to 20 medications a day for all their side effects. And same is true for relationships. And what you said, Brian, I think is very important. And okay, I will admit that some people, that are financially, well, majority of the United States, depends on how you look at it, they do not have the financial ability to take time off, which is just the worst thing ever. Because think about the responsibility of bringing a human into this world. I mean, we say that children are our next generations, the future, children are the future. Think about that. What does that mean? That means the people that we are raising right now will be in charge of this planet, of future of our race, basically. So
Yep.
not only do women have a responsibility to pick a mate in a way that will guide evolution in a positive direction, because women have the choice. Women are the ones who guide evolution, who choose
They are the
traits that they
gatekeepers.
pass on. So not only do women have to think about it from that perspective, but yes, choose a man who will not only be there, because, honestly, I believe men are, for the most part, very devoted, very dedicated to, family. They self-sacrifice, they protect, they have a devotion sort of aspect that I think a lot of women and feminists choose to ignore and lie about men not having. And so it's really up to women to stay with that man and to not allow society to tell them that there's something wrong with him and that she deserves better. Girlfriend. Like, we need to make sure that these women who are having children, not only are they picking the husband, mate, genetic partner who will provide the future that they want to see, but also that they choose that man for the rest of their lives and stay together, because you cannot underscore the importance of having a male role model, father, brain that is allowed to affect the child.
And it's funny, you're kind of talking about, once again, it goes back to the whole game theory, where you have long-term strategies versus short-term strategies, and both of them are extremely important, and they have, which one is dominant has to do with situations. If you have picked somebody who for something that is a long-term kind of goal. Well, what if something goes terribly wrong, where you've done all that you can to pick a good mate, yet this is it turns out that this mate is abusive. It turns out that this mate is not actually capable of providing for the children and is detrimental to the children. Then you need to be able to change strategies and switch off. And so, there is this trade-off between choosing the moment and choosing the future, and we find this even in our own daily lives. In this whole idea of work-life balance, where and what you end up finding is that women typically are better at the choices that have to do with immediacy, and men are typically a little bit better at the choices that have to do with the long term. And the funny thing is, you have to have both of these. You have to have an appropriate choosing pattern, and you have to what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, this is why women buy 20,000 little house decorations and men buy one big expensive stereo. But they do go together. You need both.
But one is not superior to the other is the hard thing for everyone to accept.
Well, I'll be damned. I think you can actually hear me now.
Yeah, your mic's working now.
Well, I had to go through my Oculus Rift CV1.
Oh, wow. We can't get Cherry's to work.
Up, so I think it was interfering.
Right now.
Yeah, we can't get Cherry's headphones to work worth shit. So I don't know what it is. It's the question of the dead headphones.
The question that had been bugging me through all this, and I couldn't seem to get in because my damn headphones were working, but is who first coined the term toxic masculinity? And was there a handful of people that went to the same school of thought, and then they just use the power of the internet and media and that to popularize it? I mean, where's this come from? Because generally most people on the street, at least older people, don't really relate to this stuff. I mean, I'm just curious where it even came from.
Well, I did a little bit of introduction in the beginning here, where mentioned hegemonic masculinity, which was the kind of a fallout of some of the Marxist ideology and people who have kind of taken what Marx was saying about economics and have adapted it to social order. and the idea was hegemonic masculinity, but it was debunked by sociologists. Even though gender studies people wanted to keep it, sociologists said, no, this idea of hegemonic masculinity is too simple. It doesn't account for different types of masculinity. It's crap. Let's get rid of it. But gender studies has still really wanted to keep that idea, and I think they just rebranded it as toxic masculinity. It's hard to find an exact origin moment for it, but the geek feminism wiki is the one that has kind of a big part in saying what it is. And somewhere along the way, hegemonic masculinity just got switched for toxic. And there are some Reddit areas that say that it's somehow Emma Race came up with the idea of toxic masculinity. I don't think that's just true, but I'll have to look more into that.
Yeah, and I was going to just say one thing about the going back a bit about the idea of the immediate versus the long term. What?
It seems, I'm sorry, I caught up with what I was reading, and it does seem to say that men's rights activists, but not MRAs. What does that even mean? That toxic masculinity was a term invented by men's rights, by men's activists. There we go. By men's activists to help address problems facing men that weren't explicitly being tackled by feminists.
Oh, wait, and then that means that that's not actually MRAs. That sounds like it's those guys that you know do TEDx talks that say that you know we need to fix the problems with men and boys.
Like the Few Good Men Project?
Or yeah, for women essentially. Yeah, the Good Man Project, that kind of stuff. So they're not really thinking about men, they're protecting women. It goes back to the thing I was saying before. The only reason why there is a problem within feminist circles and these sort of, essentially they're male feminist circles, with toxic masculinity as they coin it, it's not because they care about what happens to men, because we haven't had a problem throwing men in the front lines at war or under, you know, letting them die at workplace or be the majority of homeless or be the majority of, like, you know, suicides. We didn't have a problem with any of that. What we're worried about, or at least these people are worried about, is that how this is beginning or could spill over and affect women. And that's where their concern comes from.
More information about it. It seems like it's Mythopoetic men's movement is what started it, and based on, it is a wiki article for it, and based on what I'm skimming about it, is that it is a collection of organizations that were doing men's work since the 80s, and it was specifically a move away from a more conservative men don't cry, men don't need psychological help kind of idea, and moving more towards it's okay to express your emotion. If you need help, go, you know, ask for it, and here are ways we can help you. It's okay to be creative, it's okay to be gay. It's basically a way, which I believe in 100%, of bringing men and women more towards the middle, giving men more feminine qualities, giving women more masculine qualities, having a more smoother balance. And if you guys want to read more about the Mythopoetic men's movement and how it coined the term toxic masculinity, it is on Wiki. But what it seems like, the feminists took the term toxic masculinity and applied it to all masculinity.
Yeah, but that sounds like moving towards androgyny, just being everybody androgynous.
Well, there's a difference between moving all the way to the center and moving a little bit more towards the center.
From
and
your
it's just like moving all the way out from, you know, in other words, you don't go 100% in one direction or 100% in the other. But once again, like that idea of a you know, like an orbit. You know, you come in too close and it falls into the center. You go too fast or too far out and it just flies away. And there's a balance to be. So sometimes you want to go more towards the center. Sometimes you want to you know, get a little more distance between the two.
Or at least be able to cooperate with the other.
Yeah, but exactly, there is an importance to trying to find a balance. But yeah, what I was saying about the you know, the difference between the immediacy versus long term. Like one of the things, you know, I personally find it easier to focus on that the long term is kind of a better thing, but it's helped me to look at how in different environments you'll find that the gregarious animals in deserts versus rainforests tend to have a difference in the way in which they do things that have to do with immediacy versus long-term planning. And for instance, like in an environment that is more harsh, it is important to, like, say for instance, say you're a farmer and a drought comes. Do you pick up and move, or do you try to make it through to the next season and stay in the place where you've already invested all of this, all this work? And the truth of the matter is that what you find is that in harsher climates and harsher areas, it is a better strategy to be more immediate, to change very quickly. But then in a environment in which those changes are more temporary, then it is better to be more long-term thinking. And so what you have is these two opposites of either analysis paralysis, where you're always jumping from one thing to the next and never really get anything done, versus being too long-term, where you just stay the course even though it's a lost cause. And so we end up finding that, from everything from the way the brain works to the way in which your strategies for different species. I mean, what you'll end up finding is in gregarious animals you actually have a female dominated versus male dominated, and it's funny that in a lot of cases you have the female dominated societies that are dealing with they're more adaptive. They jump from one place to another very quickly, whereas the more male dominated, they're actually moving more towards the kind of the long term. And of course, these are really generalities. I'm speaking, very generally, of course. But it's interesting to see this kind of difference in those strategies of picking that there is. It's always been difficult for me to see that immediacy, choosing immediacy over the long term, is its own benefit as well. And that's the thing. I personally have always valued long-term thinking, but then started thinking about, okay, so say you're in a castle and there is an army coming, and do you stay or do you move? Is there safety in the castle, or is the castle actually a trap? And it really has to do with circumstances, and until you really look at the context and the circumstances. How big is the army? How long can they last? In one case, the right answer is the wrong answer. The answer completely changes based upon the circumstances, and the same thing is true of long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. It's extremely context dependent, which is the superior, and each one of them kind of defeats the other. They are these complementary opposites of long-term versus short-term, and so that's once again. As men, I think men sometimes, kind of tend to look down on immediacy because we see all the problems with it, but then, we don't look at the problems with that staying the course, even though a change should be made, and so we don't see that kind of breadth thinking. We don't see the value of that, and so there's kind of a subtlety, I think, to those breadth calculations. And once again, this is kind of my own personal view. I think that women tend to run circles around men when it comes to breadth calculation things, when it comes to looking at a lot of things simultaneously, at once, and being able to be very adaptive in a single moment. I think that's why women are really a lot of times better in social arenas, because they are able to calculate a lot of simultaneous things really quickly, whereas I tend to think that men are a little more long-term thinking, and so they're kind of out-competed when it comes to everything from like the quick quips to to being able to know what's the right thing to do in a certain social situation, because everything about all of these different people and how they interact and what each motion means, and you kind of see these things in primates and the way in which they behave socially, and how power structures among primates work, and how even when you have like the alpha male, the alpha male is kind of a centerpiece in a certain way.
He's there by the grace of the women.
But exactly. He's completely just an extension of the feminine power. The feminine power, you kind of see this one big monkey, and you can focus on him, but he's just a tool. He's just he's kind of like a dog on their leash. And so the feminine power is subtle, and it's not right in your face, but it is actually in certain cases the greater of the two, and I think that's one of the things that we have had a problem with, everyone, male and female alike, is recognizing and seeing the way that feminine power works and how it can become superior in a variety of ways. And I think that's what's happened with feminism, is that feminism has overcome men. Where men in general have been, their minds have been taken over in a certain way, and you've got all these men who think that they're making the right choices because truthfully they are the weaker species when it comes to this battleground. They are the weaker, but not species, but you know what I mean. They're the
sex.
Yes, they're the weaker sex in this arena, and they just kind of get slapped around on this particular plane, and so that's I think there's a lot of science to back that up, but once again, it is
Well,
we're kind of speaking in generalities here.
I'm going to disagree. The reason why I'm disagreeing is I don't think that men and women's brains are that binary. I think men and women both do long-term and short-term thinking when it comes to things. It's just that they choose to position their long-term and short-term strategies in different categories, depending on, what circles that they gather strength from. I think it's much more, I do believe in neuroplasticity, and I think it's ever-changing, it's this evolving thing. So
Yeah, but here's the thing. I also think that we're dealing with amongst our small group of people here, I think we're dealing with outliers. I think we have some women with more masculine brains and men with more feminine brains, and I think that and I think in general, actually, humanity has tended towards that a bit in the recent times, and there's plenty of data to back up that there's kind of a feminization of men, and then when you look at it, then this rise of autism is actually
through hormones and phytoestrogens, which we should talk about.
Right, and then the rise of autism, actually, you find that there is a masculized section of the way that women's brains are going through. So there's in different ways, men's and women's brains are tending towards each other, and then you have men who are you could consider more feminine brained if you're using that, and men men who are more feminine brained and women who are more masculine brained, then they're partners. And so, there's definitely an overlap of these circles. It's definitely not a binary. And you can, I feel as though when we use the terms, masculine or feminine, we kind of have to deal with the fact that they're binaries, but they're, it's kind of illusory. I mean, I totally agree that it's not actually a binary, which has kind of been my point most of the time here, is that it's certainly not a binary, and there's certainly exception, but the exception does not overwrite the rule. And even if it's a weak rule, a 60% rule, being that by and large, most of the time, you can say that about something that's only 60%, but that is a really weak rule, because it's greater than 50%. And I think so. Whenever we're talking about something that is a rule, the rule doesn't, deal with the exceptions very well, and the exceptions do not overwrite the fact that there is a rule. And both of these things they're useful, but then we have to recognize that we have to be able to go deeper, and whenever we're looking at individual cases and things of that nature.
Well, the problem is you're exactly right. The problem I see is where there is a problem that science is having having difficulty using language itself to be able to kind of efficiently be able to explain these theories to everybody in a way. And when it's explained, they have to pare it down, and it sounds very binary. It sounds very ABC. But if you're kind of in the mindset, the head space, the theoretical space, it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and the thing is, yes, you can definitely, like I was saying before, you can definitely become more feminine over time or become more masculine over time just by environmental factors, nutrition. There's a variety of things that can change.
Social stress.
And your brain morphology does actually change slightly, but there are also set points. We do have set points that happen during exposure to testosterone in the womb. There are differences in the brain morphology that don't change so dramatically, that it's unrecognizable, or that it's all that you go 180 degrees. So you have a general area that you tend to start in, and for you, your sex doesn't necessarily reflect your starting area. You may, as a male, apparently male sex on the outside, you may start much more in the female area, even than some females. So that there's, whenever we talk about this, there's kind of these areas that we can talk about that are male and female, and as a rule, and male brains tend to be like this, and female brains tend to be like that. But yeah, there could certainly be switched, and you can certainly drift within your starting area, because you do kind of have a starting area.
But the question is, are all male brains and all female brains, of all species, fit the same kind of models? What is masculine? What is feminine? Because I know we kind of cherry pick, hate to say this, we cherry pick certain species that we can relate to that are similar, and then we use those models. But when we're talking about masculinity and femininity, is it a broad enough term to be able to just cover, the full, expression of what, males of every species and females are?
Well, it's not every, but there are exceptions. Like what are they called? Okay, Terry wants to talk. Yes.
Sorry, I don't get ability to
Break
do
in.
anything because of my headphones.
Yeah.
So I have to.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, I just really want to quickly answer that. I feel like we do have, of course, the male dominant and the female dominant species, but it seems to me throughout nature, because at least when we're talking about pair bonding, or at least women birthing, sexual reproduction is what I'm talking about, not asexual. So in all the species that have sexual reproduction, it seems like the women who bear the children and men who fertilize the eggs and hunt, they have different roles based. You can kind of say that, yes, there is a generality of feminine, maternal, birthing thing, taking care of the babies, whatever, while the masculine is more of a fertilize, move on, fight against predators, protect the tribe kind of thing. And I'm talking about fish and penguins and lemurs and macaques, pretty much all across the spectrum of sexually reproducing species. There does seem to be a division of labor based on the sexual reproduction.
And
Yeah.
it seems to work within those species, but we're a hyper social species,
Yeah,
we live in
and
huge packs. I mean, huge groups.
yeah, and that actually is abnormal. The huge group thing is so recent that we haven't really biologically adapted to it very much.
Yeah.
You're talking about the giant size of our groups. That's 100,000 years, and so we're actually kind of maladapted when it comes to the way our genetics do things. And whereas we're supposed to be able to adapt fairly quickly, and that's why we have these systems that are so plastic and things that can move. There's only so far we can move so fast, though, and so we actually kind of have problems
Evolution has its speed.
Right.
That's why we create governments and we choose leaders, because the species hasn't caught up yet.
Yeah, yeah. Our species definitely hasn't caught up with our new situation. Our evolutionary state can't. There's only so fast that evolution can really progress, and it's these gigantic groups and all this technology and the change to our environment, our self-imposed.
Our instincts haven't caught up.
Yeah, definitely have not caught up. But
I'm just wondering about. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just. Like, the thing is, I'm curious about just the long-term effects of, because it seems that this is kind of covered not just sociological stuff, but it's also, biological and just environmental stuff when you talk about all the stuff going into the environment and how it's affecting the, the genders and things like that. And not just in humans, but other species. And then we eat those species too. And it's like this vicious cycle that's just, I don't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, you have feedback loops that are really a huge part of the way that nature works, and you see that a feedback loop can lead to a crash, or it can just lead to massive change. But yeah, the whole planet is definitely going through a wide variety of changes. The background extinction rate for the change in the background extinction rate versus our extinction rate now puts us in a major an extinction level event that is comparable to the dinosaurs, and we're currently in it, even though we can't really see it because to us it's happening extremely slowly. But on the terms of how fast things happen in geological terms and evolutionary terms, we're just huge sweeping changes are happening to species, to environment, etc. And so we do have to be able to adapt very quickly to this change. But we going back to what you were saying about about animals, I mean, yes, the testosterone, the changes to the morphology of the brain, a lot of times they're actually more pronounced in some of the species we study. But yes, there are, of course, those species which are more androgynous. There are species that are asexual. and so it is, once again, it's the sexuality and the brain morphology and those things that is a general rule, but it isn't a 95% rule. It's, I wouldn't, guess what the rule versus exception rate is on it, but it is, it's not an extremely strong rule that, things are this binary kind of thing. There's a spectrum of different species as well, but in general there is a rule that has to do with, sexual dimorphism in both the brain and the body, and the roles and the social way in which they interact, and the way in which they impact their environment, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I just have one final thing, and this is me looking up after all the buzz of, this complicated topic of, toxic masculinity, and here I am, I'm looking up and I'm saying, okay, looking into the horizon, I'm wondering, what is the end goal of this? I mean, what's the next step? What is the next step that feminism wants to reach once they've reached their goal? And toxic masculinity, they've already passed that one now, and what's next? What's the end goal that they're trying to accomplish with this term toxic masculinity?
Well, they don't have a win condition. They're trying to, I think they're trying to solve problems that they believe that they see, which they're reacting to because they're generally risk averse, they're generally scared, they're generally insecure, they see that stuff is going on, they don't actually take a moment to drink in, the larger picture, and they just want to control it.
Exactly.
And they're just, it's just control. And so toxic masculinity is just the latest tool to do that with.
As beautiful as your attitude is towards them, that they're trying to fix problems, and I'm sure some of them do that. But I feel like we, as women, have a really strong and often subconscious, because nobody ever pays attention to it, and they're not made to pay attention to it, drive to have absolute control over circumstances, men, and everything. So when you look at toxic masculinity, what it does is men acting on their own will, of their own. And
the thing is, women
seems to be so. Of course, sometimes you're going to have. So it's two things. It's one thing is men acting of their own free will, and the other thing is men reacting to pressures that women and society puts them under. And instead of dealing with it, it's just all swept under the rug as the same thing.
Well, the thing is, what I see here is, I see that women are girls or whatever that grow up to be women, and they're raised by dedicated fathers. They don't grow up fearing men perpetually, and they're not going to see toxic masculinity. As far as I'm concerned, what I'm seeing is women that didn't grow up in healthy families that had men in their lives and stuff like that, and they're acting out. I mean,
men.
Yes.
Because the male feminists do the same thing, and specifically that mythopoetic men's movement, I think, is also a product of likely the same thing, where they basically see regular, what is considered normal, heteronormative, masculine, healthy masculinity that has, in large part, shaped the civilization we live in today. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes women uncomfortable, or at least we're talking about the feminist women that that maybe they don't know what healthy masculinity looks like, and they have essentially absorbed the media, which I want to get into later. Because they blame it on media, but it likely is because they've absorbed the media and they think the media is the cause of the problem, as an example.
Let me say that.
And then they try to control it.
Yeah, I think that what you just said about how men had really kind of built society and things like that. Now, I think that this actually, there is sort of a male idea of being able to see exactly what it is that we did that actually galls women, because they know that they had a place that was absolutely crucial in supporting men and was just as important to that process of building society, that sometimes there is kind of this automatic idea of, well, what men did build society, well, what women did built it just as much, and this kind of leads to, I think that they see this galling idea. It's like, here you are giving men for the credit for the creation of society. Screw you. Well, and I can see them getting angry about that, because the truth of the matter is the importance of the support role cannot be overstated. It cannot be the way in which a support role it doesn't just enhance, it allows the frontal role, that role of the doing. It's not done without the energy. It is just as important as fuel to an engine.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely, I agree. But
and
we already give women all the credit for that.
well, no, we're starting to try to give them all the credit, and then we
Yeah.
give them none of the credit. And I think that this actually that's kind of part of what's going on there. And I think that there is basically feminism needs a counselor to tell them that what relationship counselors always tell people in a relationship. Look at the way in which you are contributing to the problems. Don't just see the problems in the relationship that the other person created. When you see them as creating a problem, find your role in that very problem. And that's the thing that feminism doesn't want to do, is see the way in which they enabled. They want to be able to take the credit for, yes, we enabled men in the creation of this of the beauty of society, but they don't want to see how they enabled and caused men in the dirty and ugly parts of society. They don't want to see that exact same role where it is a subtle role. So it's hard to recognize the subtle good and creative role that women have played. Now, we often don't recognize it properly, but then at the same time, that subtle evil role, that subtle bad role, that subtle destructive role that women play, we also do not recognize that. And so they're kind of wanting to recognize the one without recognizing the other. And we need to always, whenever we see a problem, we need to see, just like in a relationship between two people, we need to see what is our role in that, and how might we change our role in this problem, and stop believing that there's only one person that is responsible for the problem. And that's what you have in problems in relationships, is this idea that there's only one person who's responsible for this problem in our relationship. No, you need to see your role in the problem in this relationship, and that's what feminism is very much against, is recognizing their role in the problem in the relationship.
Well, sorry, Brian. I was just saying, it's like being in a courtroom, and you feel like, especially if you come from like a victim stance, and you're in the courtroom here, and you're trying to defend your case and get your dues or whatever. The last thing you're probably thinking of doing, because you think you're a victim and everybody's against you, and you're trying to defend your case. So there's this temptation to omit the other parts of the story, right? They're not going and say, well, this happened and this and then that happened and all that stuff. You're only going to like show one side of the whole thing. And that's what's happening right now. It's just one side.
A ubiquitous human problem.
It's too tempting to just, emit certain things that might, get people to think, that you want them to make one decision, and that is to just decide with you. You don't want them to kind of flounder and then make a decision.
Yeah,
Well,
you don't want them to see necessarily both sides. You're trying to influence. And if you're trying to influence, you're going to try to, bring more of one thing to the other. So we as humans, we're kind of attached to ourselves. So of course we're going to try to, bring up the good and kind of ignore the bad. And so yeah, that's just we have to accept that that's everybody's problem. Everybody has that problem, and therefore not only do we have it as a problem as individuals, we have it as a problem as groups as well.
All right. I wanted to mention with the Mythopoetic men's movement. I agree with the idea that, and before we get more into this toxic masculinity thing, I agree with the idea that what a man defines as masculine for himself, whatever he wants to do, whether he is more feminine, whether he's gay, whether he's just not like, super lumberjack guy, those should all be fine. That really comes down to a personal sense of self that you need to work on as a man. However, the only thing that I do take issue with, and this has always been something of a sore spot for me, is when these groups attack what they consider to be heteronormative masculine behavior. Like manly men that like to do man shit. And they're not destructive people by and large. They're not bad. But the way that this movement and people in them, like there's a guy named Dr. I believe his name is Dr. Katz, not a reference to the animated movie. His name is Jackson Katz, and he basically has said things like, what we consider to be heteronormative masculine behavior is something that is perpetuated by men within male spaces, and it is destructive to each other and to women and to gay men, and it's homophobic, it's sexist, it's destructive. It's and this is the thing that really bothers me, because I know that stuff does happen with individuals, but it's not a feature, it's a bug, right? When something goes wrong, it's a bug, it's not a feature. And usually you can trace it back to something that you can actually address. But to say that it's a heteronormative masculine problem is disingenuous. What they would not consider a man who was effeminate or was not like seen as what they consider to be traditionally masculine. I don't even know what that looks like. I guess Don Draper or something. They would consider if a man had more feminine qualities, there'd be no way they would call that toxic, unless he went out and did something destructive, and then they would try to find a way to make it toxic. They would say, oh, he played violent video games, he listened to hip hop music, he was on porn sites, and this is something that also was mentioned in the documentary, and I want to throw this at you. The effects of media. They have made the claim that action films, which often star male protagonists, are bad for men because it teaches them to hold in, because they don't ever express their feelings, and they hold it all in, or whatever, because they're too busy saving the day. Video games that star male protagonists, those characters don't express their feelings. You know, when you play Call of Duty, your guy doesn't weep into his sniper rifle, apparently. I didn't know that. And porno. And this is hilarious, okay? Porn, the whole thing about it is that they say that, let me go back to here, I'm looking at my notes. Porn teaches men and boys how sex is supposed to be. It assumes that the people who see this stuff have no idea what sex is like, and they're being conditioned by porn. And of course, in the examples they give, on the documentary, they only show the stuff that's kind of BDSM, oriented, that may involve like rough, play or whatever. And it assumes that women are not into that at all. And there are no women anywhere that read 50 Shades of Grey and enjoyed it. Like, even though I'm not saying that's not for me, it's not my bag. But the assumption is that porn has this greater impact on masculinity and making it toxic, and it's all about domination. It's all about violence and rape culture. So anyway, I want to throw that out there. Cherry, yes, I figured you would run with the porn thing. But
I'll go off the porn one because it's the latter one and very close to my heart. Okay, so yeah, we have this idea that porn is, well, two things in that. One, talk about BDSM porn and anti-sex bigots who are usually also feminist and speak out against porn. And then on the other hand, let's talk about realistic depictions of reality, whatever, in porn. So on one hand, we have people like Gail Dines in particular, who has this idea that all porn is porn where a girl's getting her face pissed on and stepped on and getting fucked by 3 black dicks in her mouth hole and just all sorts of horrible, degrading things that women that I've met personally happen to fucking enjoy. Let's just ignore that part, but it is this misconception that absolutely all the porn on the internet is that porn, which is bullshit of the highest degree.
And that is
dominatrix sites and financial domination sites alone. That's like half of internet porn. Okay, so it's not all BDSM towards women being submissive, and it's not all porn is BDSM, period. So, I mean, if you look foot fetish, like variety of other fetishes I'm not going to go into that exist that have nothing at all to do with violence or domination. But yet, if we have someone like Andrea Dworkin, if we follow her words and her quotes and her ideology, and she was kind of an offshoot of the second wave of feminism, and she says that the very act of sex itself is violent and dominating to women, because women are on the bottom, men are on the top. It's just how the very act of being penetrated is terrible. So
I'm sorry, real quick. It goes back to this idea that somehow sex is something that men get or men take, and women, they're just leaves on the wind that have nothing to do with it. They're not like, well, like, you've heard and regular women have said this, where they have said, well, you know what, I gave my husband some, or I gave my boyfriend some the other day, or you know what, I felt bad for him, so I blew him, or whatever. And they act like sex is something that is granted to men, and that men should be happy to get. And for whatever reason, the sex act is not something that they both actually, participate in together and both mutually benefit from.
And both enjoy. And not just that, but women are ignoring the fact that they are getting approval. They're not just giving sex that they're also getting, but they're also getting approval. And a lot of times we have kind of a setup, a situation where there's a prevalent idea of how women are supposed to behave in relationships and in sex. And a lot of it has to do with controlling the pussy economy, making the man pay with time, attention, money, nerves, whatever, the maximum amount of whatever per fuck.
And Jackson Katz actually, I want to throw one more thing in there that's related to what you're saying, and I'll let you go back. Jackson Katz actually says that men have a sense of, toxically masculine men have a sense of entitlement that comes from porn, because this is exactly how he put it. It's just like, I don't know how he did these mental gymnastics. When men purchase porn, they are purchasing women in the same way that if they purchase prostitutes, they are purchasing women's bodies for their enjoyment. Not that prostitutes are actually engaging in this of their own free will, but for whatever reason, they're canaries in cages, and men show up and take them, and then they put them back. And the prostitutes don't like it, and the porno sites don't like it, and the people doing porn don't like it, because it's something that men are getting. It's fucking crazy.
It's another example of basically extension of Shiva's law. You have feminists, not just women, but feminists, meaning men too now, that are taking something that women do more on average and saying it's something that men do. Because men don't feel entitled to sex in the same way that women do. Think about how easy would it be for any guy to go out and say, free dick here. How long is he going to wait until how long is he going to wait until a woman comes up and says, oh yeah, sure, I'll take you up on that free dick. Now, imagine that for a woman goes out and says, free pussy. She won't even finish that sentence before there's a line lined up of people willing to do that. And women know this. They know this. They know they can go out and the Beyonce song, right? I'll have another you in a minute. He'll be here in a minute. That's reality. So for women are entitled to male sex. That's why the idea of female rape doesn't exist so much, because, well, men are always up for it, aren't they? Going back to what I was saying earlier, is we have not only this idea that mistaken idea that all porn, and of course let's forget about the fact that women who work in porn and prostitution may want to sell their bodies for men to take. Everybody sells their bodies. Coal miners, office workers, everybody sells their body for money, their time.
Some people also sell their mind. It's because you have to bend your entire mind and your whole existence towards executing whatever it is that person is paying you to do. And you do your education, your whole life. You basically sell your life to other people.
Right, and we are completely ignoring that because we are basically valuing female sexuality once again because of that control that women keep so tightly on the pussy economy. We value female sexuality so much that we are seeing victims where there aren't any. It baffles me when ideas like this come from male feminists. So I'm sorry, you're not a woman. You don't fucking know what it feels like to have your body be desired and people pay money for it. You have no fucking idea. You've never experienced that because women have an advantage in having their bodies desired in our current society. Anyway, going back to the porn thing. Yes, there's a misrepresentation of what porn is out there in the first place, but that doesn't even matter if you have people like Dworkin who say the sex act itself, regardless of who's consenting where, is terrible. So let's just completely throw that in the trash, because it's just not reality. On the other hand, we have this. What was your other point, Brian? We've talked, we've meandered a little bit, but you mentioned
they were talking about. Media like film, hip-hop music, and violent video games, and how they basically reinforce these idea of hyper-masculinity, and therefore, because they sort of conflate what they're calling hypermasculinity, which I believe is rooted in insecurity more than anything else, and toxic masculinity, which maybe one thing could lead to the events in the other, but I think that most of the time it doesn't. Essentially, like you watch a rap video, right, and they're basically talking about how important things like money and girls and cars and clothes and you know, straps or whatever it is, how important those things are, and they say, you know, these social scientists will say, oh, well, this is them sort of perpetuating this hypermasculinity, which of course perpetuates rape culture because women are the biggest victims of this stuff. But what they don't understand is that when it comes to resource acquisition, which is a lot of what this rap music talks about, when it talks about, you know, how much you have or flossing or whatever, it's actually saying that because men inherently know that their best odds of attracting a mate comes from acquiring resources. So I mean, this is just the reality that.
Yeah,
it's truth all throughout nature. I mean, come on, you know, the fact that you know, like penguins, you know, there's penguins that literally they like bring the shiniest stone to the female penguin as like an offering, you know, basically for sex, you know,
for breeding rights.
right, and it's or how, you know, the male birds, they try to build the best nest and have the best call, and you know, the men all throughout nature are warping themselves around pleasing women, and then we take this behavior, which is obviously men attempting to warp themselves around pleasing women, and call it and put them the responsibility wholly and entirely on them for what that is, and that's just complete bullshit. Oh, that's loud. I mean, it's just so obvious. It's just so right in your face, no matter where you look. If you know anything about nature or reality, or not just completely just shoving your head in the sand and believing and going la 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 and trying to believe whatever it is that you want to believe, instead of seeing reality for what it is and what, you know, all the different various examples. It's mind-numbing. It's mind-bending. It's so frustrating.
Well, you know why it is. I mean, I feel like this really will hit the nail on the head and what is going on here. And I think what it really comes down to is lack of wanting to acknowledge the fact that what women say they want and what their instincts drive them to want are two different things. And women know it, and I think they're trying to kind of subconsciously trying to distract people from that, or you know,
or trying to deny it exists. I mean,
yes.
Because it's nobody wants to believe that they do shitty shit, and we all do. And so sometimes you think that,
and nobody wants to believe
fake
that
it till you make
control.
it, you know, kind of, yeah. Nobody wants to believe that they're not utterly in control. Everybody wants to play down the parts of themselves where they act upon impulse. It's like, you know, you don't want to talk about how you crammed your face with all the sweets. You don't want to talk about how you weren't really in control. And sometimes not wanting to talk about it, not want to think about it, ends up in denial.
And that ends up perpetuating the same problem, because if you don't address it and if you don't realize how it is that you're falling in the same trap of lack of control, you will always continue falling into it. So the important thing here to me is that women do have this desire for men to pair bond with, somebody, you know, who will provide them for the rest of their days, someone who will basically love them and worship them. And there's nothing wrong with that if women return the same favor. However, what women are attracted to what their raw sexual instincts dictate is Donald Trump. They're attracted to the likes of Donald Trump. The kind that is complete braggadocio, you know, ego, all the way without really nothing to back it up.
All the primate signals of potency and power,
yes.
and social status. Those primate signals are what are sexually attractive to the female primate, which developed for tiny groups of people without technology and without large civilizations and without a brain that works the way that our brain does. It's millions of years old system versus this brand new system that we've developed.
Well, just look at sorry, just look at what men buy versus what women buy. I mean, a lot of the resources that women acquire seem to be where a lot of women put it into things that they can show, like jewelry, like really rare or expensive shoes that are brand name, or clothing or hair or just anything, like a house that they have, resources that they can, extra resources. So of course they wanted Donald Trump.
Well, and that gets to the core of this whole conversation around toxic masculinity, and the one thing that feminists likely omit if they're just like ignorant of it, and that is that what men do when they go out into the world, they do because women overall prefer it in them. And unless feminists are going to, they're trying to tell men that they don't need to be masculine. They're trying to tell men that being feminine or opening up with your feelings or not chasing money all the time or not being a tough guy or not engaging in athleticism or high-risk behavior or sports, those are all things that men should be able to not do. But what they really mean is don't do those things because otherwise we'll call you a toxically masculine shitlord.
And
but
yet
what they don't
won't
get...
be attracted to you if you don't do it.
Yes, because if they don't do those things, women's pussies dry up like the Sahara Desert. In general. Yes, you might find one that's, like some that won't be that. But in general, women want men who are masculine. Unless feminists are going to change women's preferences, masculinity ain't going anywhere.
Exactly. In general, kindness and altruism dries up pussy like Sahara.
Let me also give kind of a different perspective on the idea, starting in childhood. So I had 3 older sisters. I was raised, by these 3 older sisters kind of. And so, when I got into school and interacted with other children, I completely misinterpreted the way in which boys have this competition. So boys tend to sharpen each other with insults, with little digs and things like that. And the point of that is a way of saying, hey, we bump into each other, but we're still allies. And when you come from a more feminine perspective, which is what I was coming from, you instead take that as meant to be the deepest cutting hurt that it could possibly be, 100% full competition, not competition with the intent of, hey, we're both kind of in other words, the difference between friendly competition versus absolute all stops pulled out to the death by any means at all, including trickery, including no matter what, they to the death fight. Even wars between, there's ways in which men did things in this samurai way, where it was like there was you had an honor of competing based on, we wanted to have our circumstances to be as close together as possible so we could really truly come to who is the better of these 2 warriors, even if it was to the death, with the purpose of something that basically makes the group greater because of the competition. And so men, starting out in childhood, have this drive that is all about sharpening each other and really trying to find for the betterment of the group itself. And you actually find that men tend to actually cooperate, and they find this through, in primates and in a variety of other places, that even in an environment that is sexually competitive, there is cooperation for sexual and breeding rights, and it's a very interesting thing that goes on there. But the point is, you come from this perspective, and you can actually take what is meant to be a, hey, let's compete because I like you. Hey, let's men can beat the shit out of each other in a friendly way. And that's something that is very hard to come to understand from a feminine perspective. And like I said, I was very nerdy and also feminine in a certain way. And so therefore every insult that was meant to be kind of a, hey, I hit you, you hit me back, and we toughen up and we allow these bumps into each other, because guess what? When we're out there in the shit and we're in a fight and we're fighting against somebody else, I'm going to accidentally hit you. We're going to run into each other. And so there's this kind of an attitude that is, okay, well, that means that we also need to know which one of us really needs to be in the lead here when we're in this battle together. We need to know who's going to be the front man, who's going to be just behind him supporting him, because that's good for all of us to know that and to have to be in the appropriate positions. And so men tend to have this kind of friendly hierarchy establishing situation that is for the purpose of creating a group, whereas I think that it's a little more out and out, warfare in a female mind. I think that the way in which they do things, whereas it's not as physical, that I think that the social warfare is kind of a win or loss for my smaller group. In other words, where a woman's responsibility is to her smaller, her children, her immediate mate, and it's her, and so she's actually taking responsibility more for that smaller group. And I think you'll find that a lot of times men tend to be the ones that are like, no, I got to go out for war, and they'll denigrate this thing that it actually is for the larger group, and they'll say it's like, how would you leave me and your child to go fight some stupid war, and and you see this dynamic that everybody knows about, every writer knows about it, everybody who watches TV, they know this kind of dynamic where women will choose the smaller group, and in a certain perspective it kind of makes sense. You're like, why would you go out and fight for some other group when here your child needs you, your wife needs you? And so there's this there's a difference in the way of handling things, and neither one of them is perfectly correct. They're kind of oppositional, and it's just it's kind of I think that's where some of the ideas of toxic masculinity come from, and how you have these guys who are that masculine behavior where they were all mean to me in school and shit. And it's like, yeah, you know what? They were mean as shit to me in school too, because once you start taking it the wrong way, then they're like, well, fuck you. And then they recognize you as an outsider, and if you're an outsider, then you're an enemy, and if you're an enemy, then the whole group gangs up on you, and that's just kind of instinct. And so what happens is you'll actually have these people who, taking things the wrong way, they create the situation. So growing up as a nerd, I can see how, because I was raised with a certain perspective, that my bad reaction to what they meant in a friendly way compounded into worse reactions, where they treated me worse because of the fact that I expected that and thought that it meant something worse, and was defensive and was very combative in a way in which I should have dealt with it in a much lighter fashion, and I should have been tougher, and I should have taken it as like as the sharpening, instead of it was a creative kind of destruction. It was a simply trying to slough off those unnecessary emotions, those taking things too much to heart, that because you need to, when you're working as a group, you need to be able to bump into each other. You need to be able to take a little, give a little. You need to be able to, in any kind of relationship that's going to move forward, you got to be able to be a little bit tough and take some of the hits, and be able to take some, allow the other person freedom of movement, because you can't completely control them. You have to be able to forgive instantly, immediately, all the little missteps that have to happen when you're working together. That's part of cooperation. And so that's how that competitive, that competition that we see in these children, and that what we think of as masculine, and that they obviously label as toxically masculine, are actually part of a sharpening process that leads to better future cooperation.
Well, even like, take for instance, wars where you have, two, enemies, men fighting against each other, and over time, you will always have them, like, where they get to a point where they respect each other.
Yep.
They respect each other. They totally disagree with each other, but they actually respect each other as men because of that sharpening that they're having with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
I absolutely agree with that. And that's one of the ways in which I see fundamental sort of difference between how the feminine and the masculine types relate with each other. And I have always been the same way, actually, being more masculine. I had that quintessential experience that all boys have. I was little, and there was a boy who was making fun of me and my best friend, sort of. And I said he should stop doing that, and we got into a fight that, I ended up with a bloody nose. He ended up with a big bruise on his forehead. Our parents were mad at the other. Afterwards, though, we were pals. Everything was great. And it was one of those situations that I hear happens, and I see happens a lot with men, where they butt heads, they fight, and then they become allies. While women seem to have these big groups, and they're all best friends, 5 best friends, squad goals, except those girls are tearing each other up behind their backs, and there's really no genuine alliance. It is a temporary...
No genuine friendship. But
no genuine friendship. Well, it is
there's an alliance.
It's an alliance of a type. It's a very short-term... flaky alliance. There's really no loyalty. of any kind, while men can be allies and have honor and loyalty, even though they're
And
just
so what you
allies.
have there is, once again, is the surface, and then the underlying deeper thing, and they're opposites of each other. Where you look at the surface, and it looks like the women are all allied. They're all like smiling to each other, and they're in this big group.
And they don't say bad things to each other.
And the guys are all saying bad things to each other and smacking each other. But then under the surface, you may have a much more integrated group in one place, which of course these studies actually show that men cooperate better in certain tests at least. And then in the other case, you might have these alliances are actually for the purpose of keeping your enemy closer. That's what's going on with the female alliances. And so it's just funny how there's these you go beyond the surface and it changes into the exact opposite. It has this shadow to it.
Right, but yet we never talk about toxic femininity ever.
Yeah, don't talk about the backstabbing or not trusting, the other women. On the surface, you smile and you're best of pals, but underneath, you're always wondering if they're gossiping behind your back or some sort of thing.
Well, yeah, the big part of that has to do with our evolutionary, actually just our civilization, because men traditionally, they're more adapted. They're better at warring in terms of being a general, organizing groups of people to defend, to protect, to attack, to do whatever, and it has to do with trust, with loyalties, with maintaining rules of engagement and things like that. Well, so those were the kings that did that, and then we had the queens or the women who tended more of the social web, so to speak, or social relations with everyone. And, sometimes you do need to, in diplomatic relations, you need to act like everything's fine while your army is marching on their army. You need to not betray that they're actually your enemy. You need to not lay your cards out on the table. And I think men and women specialized and are naturally a little more predisposed towards being better at one versus the other, and we just see echoes of that same behavior now. But going back to some of the things that Brian was saying, I won't get on my porn soapbox about how little representation of reality there is in porn, if only to say that is really true for women too. So you say you have men who go and watch porn and they have unrealistic representations of women bodies and women's actions. No, there's a lot more varied representation of women. Tell me this. Can you name a single big, beautiful man? Does BBM exist? Right. So while BBW
Ron Jeremy?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Ron Jeremy. There's the exception. We had to find one exception.
But I don't think people are like looking up Ron Jeremy.
No, they're really not.
I think that it's just because he's been around a while.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's kind of way older now, and he's still visible, so you get to see what he looks like now, even though that wasn't.
He's way more visible than he used to be.
Rarely will you.
No, yeah, she's having to go back and forth with taking her headphones on and off because it's not working because it echoes and but so she keeps missing the joke. So I'm sorry, baby.
It's okay. I'll take the hit. Damn you, illegal Asian headphones. All right, but no, there's speaking as a woman who's in porn and who makes friends and networks with women who are in porn, because that's what both Richard, Rall, and I do. We work with other women pretty much exclusively. We work with each other and with other women. So our sphere of interests and work contacts is women. And there are so many varied types of women that are represented in porn, especially queer porn. And most of the time, the men that are represented in queer porn are female to male transsexuals, and you don't really actually have all that often, except for maybe like Wolf Hudson and Owen Gray and Mickey Maud maybe are like the only people that are somewhat androgynous like and they're not gay, but they're sort of bisexual, and that pretty much is the most masculine thing that is allowed in queer porn. So my point is there's zero realistic representation of men in porn. Not to mention that for mainstream porn, which is why I'm so proud and happy to do independent porn and be our own producers and directors, because in mainstream porn, men are practically required to take Viagra. All of them take Viagra. In fact, there were one specific performer, and others, but one specific performer who had to quit being an adult star because he's had so many priapisms that had to be taken down that he was told that if there's any more scar tissue that builds up, he will not be able to have erections ever. So this is due to Viagra use, and it is extremely prevalent. A lot of that has to do with how unsexy mainstream porn sets are. That's why you have women who are faking, men who are jackhammering. Just nobody's having fun.
So there are some
problems with mainstream porn when it comes to representing reality, because guess what? Most people are not going to be.
But oh my God, that's not a problem with just porn at all. That is a problem with all media of every kind, where we have the perfectionism we have, and that's.
Yet they're still way more accepting of different kinds of women than they are of different kinds of men.
Yeah, exactly.
You will not
see.
So
it's certainly not a feminine issue at all. If anything, it's exactly the opposite. We see the problem absolutely everywhere except with women. So it's the one place that we've corrected it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I don't. But I mean, I would add though, I don't think that media has a responsibility to represent anything, because if you're, excuse me, I was yelling off, so I sound a little off. If you have an understanding that porn is an escape in the same way that a film or a video game are, then those things aren't really going to influence your.
Brian, though, the problem with that is you're absolutely right. If you do understand that is fantasy, and adults do. Thing is, internet, phones, freaking 7-year-olds look at porn, okay, on their phones in their pockets, because that is our level of technology and access right now.
And so then what you need is parents who are more willing to talk to their parents at a younger, to their children at a younger age about sexuality. We need to get over the whole problem of sexuality being so taboo and be able to talk to them about it. Say this, it's basically it's a bodily function that that is high risk in a number of circumstances. And so it's like it's something that needs to be talked about, but that it's a different problem. It's not a male-female problem. It's trying to make absolutely every problem in the world into this. It's all men's fault. It just gets so fucking ridiculous.
Right, and that actually brings us to my second point.
Keeps us from actually getting to the problem.
Yes, and that's why we are still here. in society, in terms of not moving past the dumb divide between genders, and in fact it's becoming worse and worse. But I do want to, this really ties into the second point, which ties into what Brian was saying earlier, right before the porn thing, which was male anger. So if you go back to my intro, and I will be providing a link, Google Drive link, where you can download my 25-minute intro, so you can rewatch it for yourself and get all the article links if you want through it. Now, if you go back to that bingo, the male protagonist bingo, if you recall, a lot of it has to do with being angry and shooting guns and things like that. So that really, to me, underscores something that the Mary Sue was talking about as well, with the Wolverine and all that, and even that understanding men, why understanding men isn't enough article was also talking about how when a boy is young, liking Batman's a great thing, but when he's 30, not so much. So all this bullshit about angry male character. Now, the thing I found very interesting, and in my life that I actually had a disconnect between the way I perceived things and what they actually were in reality, is that men express their pain through anger. A lot of times when a man is seemingly angry, or he's yelling, or whatever a woman would say, oh, that's an angry guy, he's trying to tell you that he's hurt. He's trying to tell you that there's something that just goes on in his life or inside or whatever that is causing him pain, and the way men express that generally is in a more forceful, angry way.
No, I was just going to say, and the reason for that is specifically is that there's a difference between, when you're feeling pain, do you get to stop and deal with it through crying, which is giving up, or do you have to push through because you have no choice? And when you have no choice but to deal with your pain and just keep fucking moving, then what you do is you get angry and you push forward, and that's the difference between anger and sadness in animals. Is it's like when they don't have any. They don't have a chance to mourn that they're about to be attacked. They have to be able to push through. They have to survive. And sometimes men just aren't given the opportunity opportunity. They're not given the leeway to experience an emotion other than anger, because they're not allowed any moment of weakness. And so if they have no choice but to push through, then of course the way in which it's going to be dealt with is through anger, because that is the way in which you take pain and overcome it in a fashion that is continuing forward, instead of resting on it and trying to deal with it in a different fashion.
Does testosterone play a part in that expression?
I would imagine it is. I haven't seen it specifically myself, but there's so many different ways that the brain has, the morphology of the brain is different. So in some way or another, the fact that men deal with it slightly differently lends itself inevitably to that fact that testosterone, it deals with a difference there. But
yeah, I believe that Tom Golden said on a show that one of the things that men do expend when they're dealing with pain is their testosterone. In fact, I think that they even spend it when they're being. Sometimes what guys will go do is they'll go and maybe they'll perform some task. Like some guys might focus on their job if they're going through a crisis or a project, or they'll maybe they'll play a video game to let off some steam. When they do any of those things, they might even write a song. They'll actually use testosterone to help them get through that. It's if I remember correctly, that's part of. It's actually still a masculine activity, but it's not always just it coming out as pure rage. But although anger is, as you were saying, the way that because most of the time men, if they say this is making me sad, or like I just need to be like alone or whatever for a while, or they're expressing grief, that is often a call for sympathy, and men don't usually get any. So. Yeah. Anger is more useful because it actually is more of a call for independent, self-sufficient ways of getting past a problem. And since men generally like to solve problems rather than dwell on them, that anger actually can help them do that. There's another reason why they tend to go after a project.
Well, yeah, the thing about all that is actually, from what I understand of neuroscience, pain, loss, negative things, brain damage, lesions, whatever you want to call it, is responded to by the body in one of the two ways, either through depression, which is a way to remyelinate, or through anger, which is, as you said, kind of a call to action. So in both cases, you have kind of a way to deal with the pain, the problem, whatever. And yes, because of societal constraints, and also just because of choosing one of the two ways of dealing with depression, with sadness, which is dealing with pain is either sadness or anger. These are the two ways in which women kind of gravitate more towards depression, which is why you have a lot more women who are labeled as depressed, yet less women kill themselves. While men gravitate more towards the anger thing,
and by the way, that leads to adaptiveness. In other words, like depression, they found there's a lot of a lot of changes to the brain that have to do with like prolactin, tears, dealing with prolactin, and like these things that have to do with adaptation. So it's a way of giving up and changing course and moving to something else. Whereas with anger, I think that now this is not something that. In particular, I haven't looked at the way in which anger impacts things, but I do know that through my own personal experience is that it's the exact opposite of giving up and changing course. If anything, you lock onto that course, even sometimes when you should have changed. And so I think that's the difference in the ways in which we deal with things, and that using anger to blow through obstacles and to stay the course is part of it.
Yes, and because men don't grieve like women, and they don't deal with problems like women see the way men deal with things and they say, oh, that's toxic, because it isn't my way.
It's pig-headed. It's stubborn. It's like, yeah, you know what? Stubbornness and pig-headedness are the way in which you get through to the next level. And so, well, the thing is, there is sort of a point. Pig-headedness, stubbornness, it has both a positive and a negative. Sometimes you end up wasting a bunch of time on something that you should have changed the course. But there are certain things like the invention of the bicycle, where it's just the pure tenacity alone that leads to some sort of discovery, breaking through to a next level that you would have never gotten to if you just change course every time that you run into difficulty. So there's always this choice of do you blow through the difficulty and invest a whole bunch in a possible loss, or do you get that greater gain that goes through blowing through, but then that means sometimes you're going to invest a bunch in something that you shouldn't have invested in. That's just the way. It's just two different strategies that both have their place.
Yeah, I agree. I think depression can cause you to move into a different direction, but it can also tranquilize you. So you just get stuck in a rut. And I think that if you work through anger in a way, it could also get you to kind of like be destructive as well. So I
Yeah,
mean,
they
in
both have their
extremes.
negative.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to ask you guys. There's been a lot of talk that we've been using a lot of soy in the United States. Well, this is just a given, right? But there's actually unfortunate side effects of this, and that is that it's actually having side effects on men and women, but especially men. And the reason being, excuse me, I'm going to try to read this here. High isoflavone, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, intake has been related to decreased fertility in animal studies, but data in humans are scarce. Thus, we examine the association of soy foods and isoflavones intake with semen quantity parameters. The intake of 15 soy-based foods in the previous 3 months was assessed for 99 male partners of subfertile couples who presented for semen analysis to the Massachusetts Central Hospital Fertility Center. Linear and quantile regression were used to determine the association of soy foods and isoflavones intake with semen quality parameters while adjusting for personal characteristics. The results. There was an inverse association between soy food intake and sperm concentration that remained significant after accounting for age, abstinence time, body mass index, caffeine and alcohol intake, and smoking. In the multivariate adjusted analyses, men in the highest category of soy food intake had 41 million sperm per milliliter less than men who did not consume soy foods. Results for individual soy isos, whatever, were similar to the results for soy foods and were strongest for glycine, but did not reach statistical significance. The inverse relation between soy food intake and sperm concentration was more pronounced in the high end of the distribution and among overweight or obese men. Soy food and soy isos intake were unrelated to sperm motility, sperm morphology, or ejaculate volume. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it would appear that there is a lot of stuff in our environment that has actually made it to where men and women have less testosterone in their system now than they had 50 years ago, and that men have become and I don't know that this is intentional. I think that I don't know about that. But this is something that, despite this sort of like effect that we're seeing, that this toxic masculinity conversation is going on. Do you guys follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, phytoestrogens in our foods has been a concern for some time, and there's conflicting data on it. And so of course then you're always dealing with, just like with the when cigarette smoking we first started discovering it was a problem. Then of course the tobacco industry started funding studies that were positive, and I think the same thing is kind of happening with foods, that whenever there's anything that comes out that is negative about foods, then the food industry goes and pours a bunch of money all over science and gets out whatever they want to get out. And then it takes a while for us to just sift through what's the good data and what's the bullshit data, and the how much of the experiment or effect is in each one of these, and how much is interpretation, and it's a big fucking mess. And but yeah, it seems that there's significant reason to see these phytoestrogens and a variety of other. I mean, there's even problems with pesticides, for instance, acting as a type of estrogen as well. So you have an epidemic of what is it called? Where they No, not well, yeah, gynecomastia, but also where girls have their puberty early. What's it called? Well, anyway, there's a lot of girls having puberty early. You've got a variety of things happening when it comes to
PCOS.
Yeah, PCOS.
I think one of the things about women or girls hitting puberty earlier also has to do with the absentee father thing, because when there's no fathers, women have young girls, because there's no father in their life, they tend to hit puberty earlier because it's like there's no protector provider there, so they're looking to replace it with someone earlier.
Yeah, and you really hit on something there, because whenever we are trying to study some of these effects, they're always modulated by circumstances. In other words, we always try to sit there and think that there's just one thing that's causing this effect, whereas truthfully it is the combination that does it. It's always the combination, and sometimes one may be a major part of 50 different causes, but then once you get to like where something has 50 different causes, a major one can be a very small effect indeed, even though it's the biggest one of them, and they all work together as kind of a synergy leading, and so that's why we end up seeing these effects, and then when we think we've found the one cause, it seems to be very, very small, much smaller than the effect itself, and it's just it's because there's so many things that go together in this synergy that is just the right mix to create an engine of shit. But yeah, there's definitely concerns for the feminization of the entire population through everything from pesticides to phytoestrogens, and the way in which we have created industrialized farming around this. It does definitely lead towards feminization. In which case, and the thing is that of course that could be a good and bad thing, because whenever we become hyper masculine, or very where you have extremely masculine, extremely feminine, sometimes that has its problems. But then if we're losing everything that is masculine, and then at the same time sociologically we're shitting on everything that's masculine, then basically we may be losing all that is good about masculinity as well. And I think that's really what's occurring, is that we're starting to lose everything that's good about masculinity, and because we have lost respect for the good things in masculinity, and whereas I might agree that there have been times and there have been individuals that have not respected the feminine contribution that has happened at times in certain circumstances, and that's shitty. But it's just now we have a widespread, an undeniable, modern, right now it's happening. There's an absolute denigration of all those valuable things that men contribute, and it's easily seen and it's easily dealt with, but instead we're increasing it, and that is a travesty, and it is it's a lack of understanding the way in which our two groups need to work together. We don't work together by continuing to say everything about you is bad. That's how you break up.
Yeah. And like just to throw in there too, because I know I stand up a lot for masculinity because I personally value it a great deal. I will also say that femininity is also gets attacked by feminists as well. Like real, like a woman who chooses to live a feminine life and she wants to, wear dresses and heels and whatever, they attack that as well. I don't know that they even know what they want, but it just femininity isn't much safer. And
yeah, absolutely. Some of the most beautiful, venerable things in their attack on masculinity. It's everything's turned inside out. Their attack on masculinity, they have this dual-sided thing where they want to do everything that is the worst about masculinity, and and then at the same time they want to look at everything that these beautiful things about a support role, these beautiful, unbelievably crucial aspects that we need in humanity. Some of those things, and then those things are looked down upon and just basically just pissed upon, and it's just horrible. It's heartbreaking to see that women are actually participating in a lack of respect and understanding and love of those things which women have always, even when they played a very subtle and seemingly background role, that they were actually playing a crucial and what's just irreplaceable role that was absolutely 100% just as much a part of the beauty that happened whenever we talk about any great accomplishment of mankind. And so when they don't recognize and don't value that's one of the worst travesties, and you're absolutely right that it's happening right now as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could you say that women that value their femininity, that are very feminine in nature, just inherently they value males' masculinity more so?
I would
say
maybe
that's why they're attacking it.
Yeah, no, I would say that they generally are. Now, I think that in many ways, even people who are attacking masculinity, feminists and women who attack masculinity, I think that in a lot of ways they're attracted to it too. And I think that it makes them angry that they are. Because they will be critical of it. They will attack it, but they will find those men attractive, and I think that's part of that's like something they're dealing with.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because again, it's, I know when it comes to the average woman, there's something about a guy that is, building a house, providing for his family, cutting down trees, like whatever it is he's doing, that they will find attractive.
Yeah, that's why they like 50 Shades of Grey and movies like that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
their
I mean,
secret binge.
the thing about
binging, exactly.
The thing about Christian Grey, though, is there is no such man as that. Like that, no one can exist that way.
Well,
But
no,
he is.
Brian.
He does sort of embody their fantasy, though, right?
I feel like he does exist because his whole shtick is paying someone off with things for. He's basically a sociopath. I mean, from everything that I understand of Christian Grey, I've met men who are doms and men and women who are into BDSM heavily, and there is a deep bond and trust and love between the top and the bottom. The kind of I'm gonna whip you regardless whether you like it or not. That's a fucking sociopath. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just throwing that out.
Yeah. Because you have to have trust if you're going to have a partner that you're doing this with. You have to have trust.
Yeah, there's BDSM done right and then it's done wrong, and that's kind of I think that's what Cherry was getting at, is like that.
Yeah, there's people who do it because they want to let out their aggression on a willing partner, and there's those who do it because that's what the woman wants and craves to feel.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of times I've noticed that some of the DOMs actually have a tremendous like overage of respect for women. Where it's like sometimes they're even overboard, and they're still a DOM. And it's like it's because what they're doing, they are literally doing it entirely for the woman's pleasure. And yet then with people who don't understand this end up seeing it in some negative light, because there are also those people who are basically they're like, oh, you like this, so then that means I can just do anything I want, and they're a sociopath who has no empathy, and those people do exist. They exist in both men and women, and it's just the way they act out their sociopathy are just different.
Yeah, it's kind of like what men that watch porn, one of the things that they really like to see in porn that these people get wrong is the woman's pleasure. That's why the woman's ability to, whether she's faking it or not, but her ability to be convincing. Like, for example, there is a porn star named Audrey Battoni, and she's Italian, I think. I don't know. And she was very, very, very popular. Really popular, okay, because she was curvy and, good looking and all that. And then there was an interview where they asked her about orgasms, and she basically said, I never had one. Never in my life. No one's been able to do it. They tried everything. Everything under the sun. And after that, her popularity plummeted.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I bet.
Because guys were like, well, if you're not enjoying yourself,
then fuck
then
that.
I don't want to see this.
About
Right?
10% of women are anorgasmic, theoretically, but once again, I feel like very strongly it goes back to not just the porn set, but I experience, I agree with feminists. Let me preface that. I agree with feminists in one tiny little sphere, which is let's not shame female sexuality. Thing is, though, women are doing that to women. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up in a place where it's like, you're not, masturbation's dirty and gross and only boys do it kind of thing. And it makes you a disgusting degenerate if you masturbate in a corner in your feces somewhere. That kind of imagery. It is fucking horrible and very, very destructive to, humanity. But girls like me and others that I knew grew up like that. And so women have a disconnect between their lady parts. Some women, not all, because there are women in America whose mothers gave them, mirrors and vibrators, and they knew everything that was going on. But I'm talking about natural, manual, how boys do it. Girls don't discover their bodies, or at least are discouraged from discovering their bodies in the same way. And so whenever I, was 18 and I experienced sort of for the first time this idea that, hey, how about orgasms? How about masturbation? How about discovering what your clit feels like when you play with it? And I went through about a year's process of actually learning how to come, learning how to orgasm. And this whole thing about multiple orgasms, in my opinion specifically, is that it's actually a bunch of attempts at a full orgasm. I actually think that men and women have similar orgasms to the point where there's a little bit of a refractory period afterwards too. The glands, the male head, therefore the clit actually is very, very sensitive afterwards. You can't touch it for just a few minutes. You need a few minutes refractory period, not like men exactly because of semen, etc. But I feel like male and female orgasms are a lot more similar than we're led to believe with this whole multiple orgasm bullshit. I feel like a lot of, and squirting also is provably urea. So we have faked or enhanced.
Faked herself into a corner.
Yes, women have faked themselves into a corner because of not knowing what to do with their bodies and being told this is, they see other
and also
women.
feeling inferior because they don't realize that
Absolutely.
women have to learn how to do it, because both culturally and because of and just they have a different anatomy. There's there's a variety of reasons.
Female mind literally needs to be calm in order for a female to have an orgasm. Men don't have any such constraints, but a female mind literally needs to be in a calm alpha type of brainwave state in order to achieve orgasm in the first place. And boys have practice with themselves a lot more than girls do.
And what's weird is just how few women actually know that. I think it's like 50% of women have never had an orgasm by the age of like 21. Mm-hmm. And there's some huge section of like where they whereas like the idea of a guy not having had an orgasm by the age of 21 is like, what? That's an impossibility, right?
Yeah. I think that if women had like the same, because I don't think there's any man that has a problem with a woman that understands her body, knows what she wants, knows how to make that like sort of known to her partner. Because men, when they're involved in sexual act, they I think inherently they feel a pressure to perform. A lot of times, like how well that turns out, it sort of becomes the man's responsibility. At least this is the way we generally. It is bullshit, absolutely, but this is the way we do it now. Right? He's not a mind reader, and if the man is expected to perform and the woman doesn't know what she likes, then if he scores, it's going to be luck. It's like shooting the basket in the dark, and if it goes in, yay,
Yeah, well, so, no, that it's you're not a mind controller either. And the thing is, being able to reach orgasm for a woman is an exercise in mind control. She has to be able to control her own mind.
It's an exercise in putting off dissatisfaction and minor imperfections and whatever's being done to you, and instead choosing the positive.
Focusing on the goal.
But because men are more starved, so to speak, for attention, I feel like,
and generally more mentally, we focus on one track type of thing, whereas women typically seem to be, thinking about a lot of different things.
I'm trying to say that women are more picky because they're allowed to be more picky. And so they generally, not in sex, but I mean just in general in life, they have kind of like, oh, I don't know about this, oh, I don't know about that, and I don't know if I like this, and this isn't quite perfect. While men a lot of time, they're like, oh, it's good enough, let's go with it. So because of that, I feel like there is an extra need for women to focus on the positives because their brain kind of naturally tries to discern very minute differences in value.
Yeah.
Which
is a little different than the color of that fruit.
Exactly.
That's what I was getting at. And if they had that
or not.
Yeah, and if they had that plus maybe they should also have some pressure to perform.
Absolutely.
If they had those things, and this is something that it's not gonna happen overnight. I couldn't, but I think that as men, we need to have standards too, and we need to make those. We need to make our boundaries known. We need to make our standards known. We need to let people know that we're not gonna take when a woman says, "Well, I guess I'll have sex with you," you tell her, "Oh, you can fuck off now because this isn't something that you give me."
Don't do me a fucking favor. God, that's fucking gross. That's disgusting. Fuck you. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Is like any hint that it's that they're just doing it for me. It's like, oh my God, get the fuck away from me. You're disgusting. It's like I can't.
So yeah, if women had more pressure to perform.
I think maybe everybody needs to have less pressure. This whole bullshit about sexual performance. How about, whenever people are, playing a game for fun, it's not about the goddamn performance. It's that everybody's having fun.
Yes.
And so
Oh, yeah.
instead of let's focusing on, how about everybody focus on let's fucking have fun and not give a shit about performance, not give a shit about the form, and let's focus on the function and the
Well,
function
okay.
here.
Basically, let's meet in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
don't have the girl show up and just lay down and be like, well, I hope you're ready. And then don't have the guy like
Personal
looking at
responsibility.
guides and fucking,
Well,
looking at our chakras and shit to see if he's gonna get it right.
I think it's just a simple thing. I think what's generally trying to be accomplished, like what men are looking for, like for instance, they always show the female gaze during the whole act, and it's creating this kind of a feedback loop. Like there's this bond or connection that's happening, and that both partners are showing a kind of feedback that they're enjoying each other, and that heightens it psychologically, which causes more chemicals to release, and it builds, and then it's this amazing sex thing.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of it, is each one basically feeding off the pleasure of the other for the purpose of their own pleasure, and being able to have that interplay where it's like I am seeking my own pleasure through your pleasure. And that kind of feedback loop is kind of the whole yin and yang thing. That's really, I think that they were kind of onto something with that whole idea. Now that we see that there are real, systems that work like that, and there is this complexity between the two, and it's fucking
well.
neat.
And I think biologically that's a mechanism that helps keep males and females together when they're raising children. It evens everything out that happens in life. It keeps the bond going.
Yep.
And that goes back to the porn thing, like I was saying before. One of the things that I think is the biggest turn on for men that these people just do not get is seeing the woman enjoying herself. Even if it's an act, if they're convinced that it's real, then that's what's going to hold their attention. That's why they like to watch. Like most of the time, and it goes back to what Anna was saying about like the different body types, the men in those movies are inconsequential. It's really the women that the men are looking at. They're the stars of that given moment. When I'm talking about like heterosexual porn, that isn't aimed at women. That's more like what they call the romance porn, where they're like on these beds with white sheets and it's like a Sunday morning and they got the nice cameras. But this is more like the average stuff that guys typically look at. They like to see a woman in pleasure. That's not toxic. That's men caring about women, even in that sort of distant way. I mean, maybe for many guys, porn is the best they can get right now, or at least in a given moment, and that's their way of saying, "I wish I could do this for her or someone like her."
Yeah, and the funny thing is, a lot of times the whole reason why porn has this, where a girl is like, and what they try to talk about is like a degrading position. Those degrading positions a lot of time is the woman seems to be extremely eager, and that's what the men are looking for. Is some sort of proof that this woman is really fucking enjoying stuff. She does not give a shit about anything.
She cares more about sex than her social position.
She's letting go. She's letting go.
And that's what the men are looking for. They're not looking for, and the fact that people call that degrading is absurd. It's not degrading to be lost in that pleasure, and that's the only thing they're looking for. They're not looking for them to actually be, men are looking for them to be, looked down on. No, they're looking for a woman who is so lost in that pleasure that she's like, she wants all of it. She's just like, she's just completely, because they know that they're capable of that same sort of, just the pure lust and enjoyment, and just really just getting into something. That's what men are looking for.
That they're
becoming
sexual
animals
beings too. Well, that they're sexual beings as well, not just because in our culture females are advertised as these sexual beings and men are not, and they're looking for confirmation through the act itself.
Yeah, I think you mean the opposite. Yeah,
What I understand what Jonathan means, and he means that women are seen as objects worthy of desire, while men are never represented as sexy or desirable. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you see this girl that's like in a gangbang, and she's just like, just all over it, just like a guy would be with a bunch of girls. That's what men are wanting to see. That's why they're into those things that that are falsely being called degrading. It's like, oh, there's just cum on her face. It's so terrible. No, when if a girl doesn't enjoy that, I hate seeing that. I don't want to see another dude's cum. Fuck that. But when she's just loving it, she just wants it all over her. That's fucking hot as shit. And so it's the whole point there is that she's into it. That's she wants. She just wants to fucking bathe in it. And the same thing is true when we with guys. Like a guy just they just want to just bathe in the pussy. They just want all of it. It's like and we want to be able to see that same sort of sexuality from women. It's not fucking degrading because we don't see ourselves as degraded by that sort of act. It's just this idea that a woman can't do that's causing this problem. It's like, yeah, a woman can enjoy sex to the same level that a guy can, and that's what we enjoy seeing.
Yeah, that she's not disgusted by you at all. That to the point where she desires you that much that she even wants your own fluids and stuff on her.
Exactly, and that's what men are looking for, and that's not, and men are not seeing that as even slightly degrading. They're seeing that as desire. They're seeing that as a purity of desire, as a proof of enjoyment, of getting rid of all of the facade of all of our pretense and all of the bullshit that we have to go through on a daily basis just to fucking survive, all that shit that's so unpleasant, and just for a moment losing all of that and just being purely, a kind of an innocent directly where there's just a throwing away all of the other bullshit and just being, purely in the moment. And, and we love seeing that. But yeah, I guess we're kind of feeling the wrap up here. I know I am. I think we're good. We'll end it on that. That's a good note.
Well, I think that we talked a bit about, the ways in which what feminists and consider toxic masculinity are actually quite healthy, and yes, there are instances where men can behave in a way that is destructive, but it's mainly because their masculine energy, they may not know how they're supposed to channel it because of the absent fathers
in any positive way. So it's like taking a bomb. It's like you can put a firecracker on your hand and it'll just pop and you'll have a little burn, a little sting. Close your hand around that firecracker and you're losing fingers. And the same thing is happening with masculinity. Is we're trying to clamp down on it and causing something worse.
Exactly.
So is there any final statements, I guess, from the the creator of the show, Anna?
Yes, I would like to bring us to a close here. Let's see. I think we the main point is we're still sort of unclear whether or not feminist movement as a political movement and a philosophy, if it is we're teaching men to be toxic or it is men themselves that are toxic. It really seems it's the latter more than anything else, based on all the information and the papers and articles that we that we read, that feminists wrote. And it's really would be nice to see representations of maybe not toxic femininity, but at least a way to maybe drop the gender aspect of toxic human behavior and talk about general ways of behaving that both men and women have that affect each other negatively. But my main, I guess, message to feminists at the end of this would be, well, first I'd like to say a message to guys, which is, I believe in you and I trust in you, and I think most men are good and beautiful and everything that's right with the world, but I also know that there's a lot of pain and pressure and you want to close up and fight, and I understand, and it's okay. But you got to understand that there are people out there, there are women out there who care and who will provide a warm space, if not, for you as a person in terms of a partner or something like that. Maybe not that, and maybe not yet. I do think that women have kind of, fucked themselves into a corner where they have made relations with men almost impossible unless they change the way, at least when women change the way they approach their own culpability, and like Karen says, own their shit. And I think we need to find some way. I don't have any answers, but I really wish we could find a way to show feminists the true side of men. And I think Jonathan, it really goes back to what Jonathan was saying. It has to do with father figures, with people in their lives that they, had bad feelings about. And speaking as someone who was told a lot of things that were bad about my father by women. It's women that need to listen up and stop berating men. Just stop. When will you learn, women, to put yourself in a position that you're claiming men? Okay, let me rephrase that. The golden rule basically is what I'm trying to say. Women say things about men and advocate ways of treating men that they would never wish on themselves, and they behave towards men and think about men in ways that they would be abhorred if women were thought of in those terms. But yet it's okay to denigrate men and to hurt them, and of course we're told it's not okay to hurt women. And I just really want people to stop hurting men. And I don't know how we can achieve that other than to just beg women to become feminine again. Beg them, I beg you, women, please soften up, open your heart. You will learn that once you start loving, you will feel loved. And a lot of what is happening is women are a little bit spoiled by all the attention and all the praise and validation that they get from society, and they don't realize what it's like to not have that. And men don't have that. And so they feel like they're wronged, and they feel like they don't have absolutely everything perfectly their way, but they have no idea how much they get that men don't get. So if we could force some empathy, if we could create some sort of boot camp workshop where women get to walk in male shoes for a day, I really think that would help everything. And we critically need empathy for men. And this toxic masculinity thing is going in the exactly opposite direction and is not helping anyone, and in fact is creating more and more toxic situations, because when something doesn't work, you don't just apply more pressure, and when that doesn't work, apply more pressure. No, that's how you break things. So instead, we need to heal, lift up, give, instead of just keep constantly taking away from men. And those are my final statements. And if you guys have anything else to add, please go ahead.
Well, my final statement is that because I'm a person who looks at the glass, half full, or actually I just see it as just a full glass, just smaller. But I think that we live in a time period where at a crossroads where you're seeing both men and women, and they're not subscribing to these ideologies, and it's exciting to see them starting to kind of like, step up to the track and walk the talk and start sticking up for each other and, speaking out about these things. So I haven't given up hope, and I've never, no matter how poorly women are acting right now, I still will not give up on women, and I've never hated men. I relate to them 100%. So I just, like I asked my wife, I say, like, when you see these women acting this way, how does it make you feel? And she just says, I am just humiliated, embarrassed to be a woman. And I'm trying to change things. I'm trying to get women to, see these things and to, start to mature and grow up and move forward, because I think men and women need each other as a species.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all I have to say. I'm not a wordy person, so.
Well, no, I think that's really important, because I relate to that feeling that Allison has. I, for the longest time growing up and seeing how women treated men and how women treated each other and how women treated me, I was ashamed of being a woman. Absolutely. That happened to me. And then I realized that I wasn't taking everything that femininity has to offer, and I'm not expressing everything good that femininity has to offer, and that there's so much beauty in that mother figure, that the forever home, the forever love space. And I now aim to provide that for everyone, and especially now in the current climate of extreme division, everybody's getting so fearful and so worried and so closed up.
So lonely.
So lonely. It's making me very emotional, but I really feel like hope and love will save the day, and that's what I'm here to provide. So, go team.
You betcha.
All right. And I will just say to the men out there, don't be afraid to be men. That's it. The feminists do not represent what women actually want. They represent their own ideas. And there should be no shame in being men in whatever way that is for you, whether that's masculine or not.
And there should be no shame of being a woman.
No, of
You
course
shouldn't be shamed by other women for being a woman, whether that's choosing to be a mother or whatever.
Yeah, just in general, shame is not a helpful emotion. I mean, you can feel regret about actions that you've done, but you also have to realize that you were a product of your environment, and the moment you make the conscious desire to change, you are no longer bound by what your past self did. It's a new world. It's a new life. Everything is possible. The future determines who you are.
Yeah,
So just remember that. As
you
long as
might,
you open your heart and strive to help and to love, you will be a good person, regardless of how many mistakes you make. And it's okay.
yeah, you might get some resistance along the way because of this. You're standing, sometimes you might feel like you're standing alone because you are standing by your own, you know, what you value or whatever. But, you know, in the end of the day, you know, it'll all work itself out. But anyways.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I've been seeing a lot more couples on shows and in person, and it seems like there's kind of a in all groups kind of a respect and a love of all that which is couples, and a loving kind of coming together again. And so yeah, I don't know, I feel really hopeful about the future, and that that we're going to, perhaps this division that was kind of created between men and women by feminism and by whatever, other cultural things that have occurred, whatever all of the different aspects of it are, that division perhaps has kind of given us an appreciation of what it is that we are missing and what kind of power we have when we are together. So
perhaps, well, perhaps that division would be a good topic for your next show. A way of trying to dissect it and to create ways to build bridges again.
Yeah, I think it is really important to get lines of communication started, because that's one of the things when you end up reacting to somebody hurting you, then the other person's reacting to you hurting them, and it just ends up being a reactionary defense walls being built up. It's war, exactly. So
and war is hell.
War never changes. But we aim to change it. There's no need for war. There's a whole war of the sexes. Who came up with that? I mean, talk about some shit. And actually, a lot of it has to do with some early 40s wartime advertising. And yeah, perhaps that is quite a good topic to finger the real culprit. The one who actually broke apart
absolutely
the sexes.
And we can, because there was some of that on the food documentary and on
finger them.
Yeah, there's some interesting social culprits that have influenced people, and when they had the power of the mic, in early television days and things like that, and the ways in which they manipulated people into believing this is what everybody's doing, this is what you should be doing.
They manipulated female social standing. They basically made women worried about their social standing and about people talking about them behind their back, and they just paranoidified women. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of
the people who used our fears against us.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, I definitely feel like we do need to start building bridges as well, because that's one of the beautiful things about humor is when something's funny. That's one of the only ways you can sneak truth in past somebody's walls, is when it's funny. And make it funny and they won't kill you. Make the truth funny and people won't kill you. It's kind of the idea. So, and I do think we need to simmer down a little bit in order to establish a dialogue. But it's kind of difficult because you have people ramping it up on one side, and then you want to respond to it. But then, of course, when you gaze into the abyss, it gazes into you. And there's a lot of complex stuff there that just being reactionary is not the best way of building a future and a bridge. So yeah, that is definitely something we need to focus on now. We've talked about how bad these ideas are. Everybody knows now. Everybody knows that feminism is bad. Feminists know feminism is bad. That's why they're trying so hard to be like, ban bossy, ban bitchy. Why is feminism a bad word this year?
Yeah, but sometimes you got to give people an out. And it's like, exactly. how do you back down from where you are right now with and still hold a little bit of face,
Exactly.
Give people an opportunity to take an out.
Right.
So you see,
I'm convinced we do need to build that platform and a bridge and ability for people to say that they were wrong, on both sides if it has to be,
Or not even talk about the past and just move forward to the future. Who gives a shit about the past?
Well, I think that's what Germany did. They were like,
Well-
let's focus on the future, shall we?
Well, I've
Forget about what we did in the 40s. Let's, move on. So,
Well, what I've always looked at the core of, at least the founding core idea of the Badgers, what I've always thought of the Badgers as is less on being soldiers and more on being diplomats. That's why we don't have any problems interviewing and having fair discussions with feminists or any other group that is in this arena. We want discussions with the whole thing. So it has always been about trying to come up with dialogue and building bridges and trying to hammer through this stuff to come up with real solutions, because we're going to need information from both sides. We have to get our emotions out of it.
But I think there's a time for everything, and so I don't think there's any missteps taken either. And there are the times that you have to rage through.
Well, diplomacy's not an easy job.
You have
It's the
to point
hardest.
out to people.
Yeah.
You have to point out that you did. When you talk about that someone hurt you, it's like, hey, I was stabbed and it sucked and it was terrible. I'm gonna slap the hand away that stabbed me. And then the hand that you're slapped goes, oh, you slapped me, you misogynist. And it's like, it's understandable that you don't want to hear that you did something wrong, but we have to get over. You have to take responsibility for things that you have done, women, perhaps intentionally, unintentionally. Point is, mistakes were made. People were hurt. Shit sucked. You need to leave space for people to talk about it. But then let's all move on without blame if we can.
Right, and it seems like there may be, I don't know, I kind of feel like we're at a point where we're at a point in that fight when it's now time to kind of change. I don't think there was anything wrong with the fight up to this point, but I think that maybe we're at that point in the fight where now we got to be like, okay, let's just move forward now. You've noticed there's a problem. You may not have, you may not have noticed there was a problem before. Maybe that was why it was necessary for me to speak so loudly. But now that we've noticed the problem, there's no point in me continuing to yell. Now that's a time to calm down and try to find the path back together and to heal. Yeah.
Yes, because both sides want justice on what both sides have lobbed over the fence. So now we have to just say, okay, we both have lobbed each other over the on the head with a rock or something like that. We got to move forward, otherwise this is going to be perpetual forever. We've got to move forward.
Yep.
Exactly. So let's come together and
right now. Over you.
Yeah.
Let's come together and provide safe spaces for each other. And what I mean by that is tolerance means allowing people to bump into you and forgive them and accept them and all together try to strive to be better. And I think we all can do it. And I think we got a lot of capable, talented, and extremely smart individuals here who can go out there and make real change just by talking to the person next to you, just by expressing yourself and sharing yourself with them. And sometimes, you can only share things by fighting. But other times, there's other ways of sharing. And, in a traditional sense of sharing, holding hands, all that kumbaya bullshit, yes, let's go, let's do it. And I feel like there's a lot of hope out there. And shows like, Orange is the New Black is using female sympathy, universal female sympathy in ways to show what men usually go through the most. And we are starting to find ways to reveal those in our society that are actually hurt, that actually need help. And it's not a gender issue. And there's so many things that feminists can do to help those who are less fortunate than they are. Thing is, they're so stuck in the victim complex point in time right now that we just need to kind of all move on. And we as men's rights activists need to try to bridge and go towards the feminists, and feminists need to let go of the victim complex and come towards us. And I think we can do it. I think we just can start a dialogue and do it, and it'll be good. So
yeah, I think instead of, just as a final note, because I know you have to wind down, I think rather than safe spaces, I think what we need to do is we really have to build up trust. We don't trust each other anymore. That's why we want these safe spaces to hide in. I think we need to start trusting each other again.
Well, that's what I mean by safe space. How do you create a safe space other than by being trustworthy? And that's what I'm trying to say. It's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And how is any space safe if you refuse to trust those who are in it.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Exactly. So my idea is to basically create an environment of tolerance, not a feminist safe space where you just hide from everything and never, look inside or figure out what's wrong. No, I'm talking about a place where you feel safe to explore what's wrong and to look in
and you recognize your part in producing safety, which is taking that risk to trust.
Yeah.
And when you don't, then you're the one who is keeping safety from occurring.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a two-way road, and it's about time we started walking it. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for CherrySTEM number 9, Toxic Masculinity and Male Cooperation versus Competition edition. And we will see you guys next month on this channel with a brand new topic. Now, have a great Sunday, everyone.